The engine of my car had been cooling off for hours, and so had I, the metal clicking rhythmically as it surrendered its residual heat to the biting, indifferent Chicago night. My own warmth had long since abandoned me, replaced by a crystalline, hollow clarity. The city was sleeping, or at least pretending to, draped in that fragile, deceptive tranquility of 5 a.m., where the urban roar hushes into a mere whisper of distant traffic. But in the driver's seat of my Honda CR-V, there was no room for the sanctuary of sleep. There was only the cold, an encroaching predatory chill that had seeped through the glass and settled deep into my marrow as I sat, motionless, watching the window of room 314 at the Monarch Hotel. I watched the lights flicker on, a yellow bloom against the charcoal skyline, then dim and finally mercifully vanish into the dark. They had walked in together. Him, Daniel, my husband of 7 years, the man whose breathing had been the soundtrack of my nights for nearly a decade. He was wearing that navy blue blazer I had hand-selected for him last September, the wool still holding the scent of his expensive cologne. And her, a tall, predatory silhouette with dark hair pinned up in a careless, elegant coil, dressed in a striking red dress that seemed to scream like a siren in the subterranean gloom of the parking garage. They were laughing. It was a private, melodic sound that drifted through the concrete pillars. He opened the door for her, his movements fluid and practiced, possessing that precise, gentlemanly gesture he always used for important clients. A gesture I had foolishly, blindly believed he reserved only for me. They didn't kiss at the entrance. That would have been too vulgar, too transparent for a man of Daniel's calculated social standing. Instead, they exchanged an intimate, knowing look, a silent dialogue of shared secrets, before they disappeared behind the revolving doors. That was the singular, devastating moment when the world, my carefully constructed world, split in two with a silence so deafening it rang in my ears. My phone, clutched in my sweaty palm like a lifeline, buzzed with a soft, persistent vibration just as the first jagged fingers of pink light began to scratch the ink-black sky above the distant Willis Tower. I looked down. A text from him. Daniel. Honey, I'm sorry. It's going to be one of those nights. This damn tax closing for the Vanderbilt account has me tied to the office. Don't wait up for dinner. I'll call you in the morning, Zoxo. I read the text once, then twice, then a third time, the letters blurring into a chaotic ink blot. The words danced on the glass screen, well-polished professional lies, so expertly crafted they were worthy of the successful corporate attorney he had become. Tied to the office, he said? Only the office, apparently, had a king-size bed and a panoramic view of the river. The coldness I had been accumulating all night, layer by layer, like frost etching a window pane, suddenly coalesced into something solid, sharp, and lethally useful. It was no longer a weight dragging me down, it was a weapon. My numb fingers moved with robotic, terrifying precision. Me, calm down. We are going to sign the divorce papers. The response was almost immediate, a frantic spike of digital panic. A phone call vibrated against my thumb, which I declined without blinking. Then another text. Daniel, what? Not this drama again. Eleanor, you're joking, right? I'm up to my neck in work. Me? I'm not joking. Come down now. I'm in the parking garage. There was a long, eternal pause where the city seemed to hold its breath. The screen showed the little bubbles indicating Daniel is typing, appearing and disappearing several times as if he were searching for the right words to defuse a bomb whose fuse had already burned all the way down to the powder. Finally, a simple message appeared. Daniel, where? I didn't answer. I locked my screen and stepped out of the car, my boots hitting the concrete with a hollow thud. The morning air was a strange cocktail of freshly brewed coffee from the corner cafe and the sharp, chemical tang of gasoline. I leaned against the hood, crossing my arms over my chest. They weren't shaking. That fact surprised me more than the betrayal itself. I waited as the minutes dragged on, stretching into infinity. Then the revolving door began to spin and he stepped out. He was wearing the exact same clothes from last night, now crumpled and mournful, and his hair, always impeccably styled, a testament to his obsession with control, was a disaster of stray strands. He searched the shadows with his gaze, his face etched with confusion, until his eyes finally locked onto mine. I saw the color drain from his face, a sudden ghostly pallor. It was an instant, raw physical reaction. His mask, the practiced facade of a confident attorney, of a husband in total command, cracked open for a fleeting second, exposing the raw, unadulterated panic beneath. He walked toward me, his pace slow and tentative at first, then hurried. He tried to assemble a smile, a crooked, nervous mimicry of the man I used to know. "Eleanor, my God, what are you doing here?" His voice sounded rough, sleep-heavy, and utterly damningly fake. He reached out, his fingers twitching as if to pull me into a hug, but the rigid architecture of my crossed arms acted as an impenetrable barrier, stopping him dead in his tracks. "What's wrong? Did you follow me? This isn't what it looks like, I swear," he mumbled, his voice dropping to a desperate, placating whisper. His eyes darted everywhere, from my frozen face to the dusty hood of my car, to the dark hotel windows, anywhere but into my soul. "Oh no," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, alien and detached, calm as the surface of a frozen lake, as if it belonged to another woman, a much stronger woman. I pulled the phone from my pocket, the device feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my palm. I didn't open the messages, the digital breadcrumbs of apologies and hollow reassurances that had once anchored my world, now felt like nothing more than paper-thin illusions. Instead, I bypassed them all and opened the photo gallery. The first image shimmered onto the screen, a timestamp from mere hours ago. The two of them walking into the hotel lobby, his hand resting firmly, possessively on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership that felt like a serrated blade against my heart. I swiped to the left, and the second image appeared. A brutal clarity captured 3 days ago by the private investigator I had hired in the suffocating silence of my own suspicion. Daniel and Chloe, that same woman in red, whose name had become a poison in my mouth, laughing on a sun-drenched patio by the Riverwalk, sharing a bottle of expensive white wine, his hand draped casually, intimately over hers. I swiped again. There were more, a gallery of betrayal, but the first two were enough to turn my blood into liquid nitrogen. I held the screen up to his face, forcing the pixels of his infidelity into his vision. I watched with a grim, detached fascination, as his pupils dilated, swallowing the light. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, and I saw the very moment his repertoire of pathetic excuses crumbled, dissolving into the biting, frigid morning air. "And this isn't what it looks like either," I mirrored his previous cadence, my voice a hollow reed. "Daniel, is it another client? The daughter of your best partner, perhaps? Chloe Miller, 28 years old, freshly minted in the tax department. Very dedicated from what I hear. Eleanor, please listen to me," he stammered, his voice fracturing into a pleading rhythmic rasp. He lunged forward, reaching out as if to physically anchor me, but I yanked my arm away, recoiling as if his touch were a searing iron. "No, you listen to me," I snapped, my voice finally finding its edge. "I've spent this entire interminable night waiting here, a sentinel in my own life. I watched the light in your hotel room extinguishing whatever shred of faith I had left. I read your pathetic lies about working late, lies that have curdled in the air for years. I realized then that I had stopped listening to you long ago. I had simply been too terrified of the void to admit it." I took a deep, shuddering breath, the freezing air slicing through my lungs like glass. "The papers are ready. My lawyer, Miss Vance, yes, the very woman you recommended for that tiresome HOA dispute, has finalized everything. Your copy will be waiting for you at the firm at 10. I will be there at 11. With any luck, you'll have managed to shower and concoct a more imaginative fable to tell your mother about why your marriage has finally turned to ash." "You can't do this," he exploded, the mask of the doting husband shattering to reveal the snarling, cornered animal underneath. That familiar ugly rage of a man who suddenly realizes he doesn't hold all the cards. It's insane. Over some trivial misunderstanding? She is just a girl, she means nothing, it's a work thing. A work thing, I repeated, the phrase tasting like bile. For the first time the numbness gave way to a surge of pure righteous fire. A thermal that melted the ice in my veins. Sleeping with the daughter of your senior partner is a work thing? Squandering our savings, the capital meant for the life we claimed we were building, to fund her apartment and her jewelry, is that a work thing too? Please, Daniel, do me the final honor of not treating me like a fool until the very last second. My voice, sharper and louder than I had intended, caromed off the concrete walls of the parking garage. A valet, emerging from the hotel, cast a curious, lingering glance in our direction. Daniel shrank, his face burning with the sudden, searing heat of public humiliation. "How do you know about the apartment?" he whispered, bewildered, his bravado draining out of him like sand from a ruptured bag. A cold, mirthless smile ghosted onto my lips. It was the first moment of genuine power I had felt in years. I am no longer that naive Eleanor you met, the one who believed that coming home late was merely the result of traffic on the Kennedy Expressway, the one who convinced herself those frequent business trips to Miami were exclusively for golfing with clients. That woman froze to death in this passenger seat last night. The one who remains, I said, reaching for the door handle, has finally done her homework. I hauled myself into the car and slammed the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He stood rooted to the pavement, pale and disheveled, watching the sprawling gilded architecture of the life he had built on a foundation of lies collapse at his feet. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a healthy, decisive growl that silenced the tension between us. I rolled the window down just a sliver. His eyes, wide and hollow with genuine, unadulterated fear, met mine. "At 11, Daniel. At the office. Do not be late. You know how I despise it when people squander my time." And before he could articulate another frantic plea or weave another web of manipulation, I shifted into gear and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I watched him grow smaller, a pathetic silhouette lost under the sterile, unforgiving light of the Chicago dawn, still clutching his phone, the cold evidence of his ruin glowing uselessly on a darkened screen. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. Instead, I reached out and toggled the radio dial. An old Fleetwood Mac song began to play, its melody ironically upbeat, and I turned the volume knob until the music drowned out the ghost of his voice, the erratic pulse of the drums mirroring the frantic, liberated beating of my own heart. For the first time in an endless, suffocating night, I pulled a real breath into my lungs. It wasn't the shallow, rhythmic inhalation of a woman playing a part. It was a sharp, jagged, and agonizing gasp, the desperate intake of someone who had just breached the surface of a dark, crushing ocean after nearly drowning in the depths of a lie. I knew with a chilling, crystalline clarity that the war for my life was only just beginning. The repercussions would be monumental, a landslide of scandal and fury. But last night, within the cold, concrete bowels of that parking garage, I had fought the first and most vital skirmish of my existence. I had clawed my way back from the brink, and for the first time in 7 years I had won myself back. 3 months earlier, the atmosphere in our Lincoln Park penthouse had felt deceptively tranquil. A soft, languid breeze drifted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, carrying with it the lingering sweet-rot scent of a dying summer. Yet the light had shifted. It was no longer the brilliant, relentless glare of July. It had deepened into a rich, honeyed, and heavy amber that whispered of approaching autumn. I, Eleanor, stood leaning against the cool mahogany doorframe, my eyes tracing the way the setting sun ignited the brick facades of the neighboring brownstones. In my hand, a crystal glass held the remains of a Chardonnay that had long since lost its crisp, bracing chill, mirroring the tepid state of my own spirit. Behind me, the apartment loomed, far too expansive, far too immaculate, and deafeningly silent. "This week is going to be hell, honey," Daniel murmured, his voice cutting through the stillness as he emerged from the bedroom. He looked impossibly polished in that light blue shirt, the crisp, expensive cotton I had carefully ironed for him that very morning, pressing out every wrinkle with a devotion I no longer felt. He stood before the hallway mirror, adjusting the silk of his tie with a quick, clinical, and expertly practiced gesture. The same movement he had perfected over years of performing for stern judges and demanding deep-pocketed clients. "The Vanderbilt case is about to explode," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Late meetings, business dinners don't wait up for me." It was the third time he had repeated this mantra since Monday, and it was only Tuesday. I turned slowly, resting my hip against the windowsill, my gaze fixed on his reflection. "Another dinner with the same client," I remarked, my voice devoid of accusation but thick with a mounting, unspoken exhaustion. "It seems Mr. Vanderbilt prefers our company to his wife's." Daniel let out a low, hollow chuckle, the sound a lawyer makes when he is trying to bridge the gap between truth and convenience. "He's a big fish, Nora. A big fish with a messy, expensive divorce and an investment portfolio that spans half the Cayman Islands. These courtesies are just par for the course." He crossed the room and pressed a quick, perfunctory peck against my cheek. His cologne, a complex, woody scent that had once made my heart race with intimacy, now felt like a shroud. It no longer evoked desire. It merely triggered memories of sterile hotel lobbies, late-night transit, and the cold, unread invoices I knew he kept hidden from me. "You know how this goes," he said with a practiced shrug. "I know," I said, and the tragedy was that it was the absolute truth. I understood the theory of us perfectly. 7 years of marriage to a rising attorney at a prestigious Lysol Street firm had provided me with a masterclass in the mechanics of ambition. What I couldn't grasp was why the practice, the reality of our life, made my stomach knot into a tighter, more painful coil with every passing day. "And your dinner with Sarah?" he asked, reaching for his leather briefcase, the one his partners had gifted him the day he made partner. "She has to stay late at the gallery to coordinate the new exhibition," I replied, my voice steady. "That's a shame," he said, already focused on the front door. "Order something nice for yourself. I don't know what time I'll be back. Don't wait up." The door clicked shut with a muffled final thud. Silence rushed back to claim the apartment like a rising tide. I finished the warm, acidic wine in one swallow. Business dinners. In the beginning, when he was a wet-behind-the-ears junior associate, they meant cold, greasy pizzas eaten over stacks of legal briefs at the office. Later, they evolved into steak dinners downtown, a sign of his growing stature. Lately, however, they had mutated into vague, sprawling events with shifting timelines and non-existent boundaries. For years, I had played the part of the understanding wife, even proud watching my husband, the brilliant Daniel Bennett, climb the ladder of success with a lethal, focused determination. It was only when I finally looked up at that ladder from the dark, lonely basement of my own isolation that I realized the terrifying truth. I was no longer climbing beside him. I had been discarded on a landing, a decorative piece of baggage he had shed so he could ascend faster, unburdened by the weight of a true partner. A week later, we were at my younger sister Claire's wedding. It was a picturesque, almost sickeningly beautiful celebration tucked away in a modernized vineyard in Harbor Country, Michigan. The air was thick with the scent of fermented grapes and expensive perfume. The tables were laden with gold, and the evening was punctuated by the chime of crystal and the warmth of genuine laughter. Daniel looked impeccable, as he always did. The perfect, tailored suit, the charming smile he bestowed upon my mother, the witty, well-timed jokes he cracked with my uncles. He was the golden husband in the golden light. But I, who had spent 7 years learning to map the geography of his face, saw the cracks in the facade. I saw the hidden tension behind his smile, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching. I saw his gaze drift every few minutes, scanning the horizon as if waiting for a signal only he could see. I saw how he kept his wristwatch within constant, nervous view. "Your better half seems to be in a rush," murmured Sarah, her voice a low vibration that barely cut through the festive hum of the vineyard. My older sister slid into the space beside me, her silhouette elegant, the crystal flutes of champagne in her hands catching the dying embers of the sunset. Her gaze, sharp and perceptive as a hawk's, tracked the same erratic trajectory as mine. Across the sun-drenched patio, Daniel was ostensibly engaged in conversation with my father, yet his posture betrayed a jarring dissonance. He stood stiffly, a statue carved from anxiety, his body angled away from the warmth of the celebration as if he were already halfway to an exit. "The Vanderbilt case," I replied, my voice a practiced, hollow resonance. The name was a talisman, my universal shield against curiosity, a wild card that I had played so many times it had lost its meaning. Sarah took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, her eyes reflecting the golden vines that stretched toward the Michigan horizon. "That case must have more tentacles than a mythic octopus," she mused, a hint of skepticism sharpening her tone. "It has been wrapping him in its suffocating coils since the first thaw of spring." She turned her head, fixing me with a sideways, penetrating look. "Are you two actually truly okay?" "Sure," I said, the word feeling brittle on my tongue. "Why wouldn't we be?" "I don't know," she sighed, her gaze softening with a sisterly pity that stung more than an accusation. "Because he seems significantly more fascinated by the scrolling stream on his phone than by your sister's wedding dress. And because you have a smile plastered onto your face that reminds me uncomfortably of Mom the day the dog devoured Grandma's rosary, a fragile thing waiting to shatter." Before I could summon a defense, the air between us shifted. Daniel had crossed the distance, his presence looming large. "Honey, I'm so incredibly sorry," he murmured, his palm coming to rest on my shoulder with a pressure that felt strangely devoid of warmth. A phantom chill raced down my spine, an involuntary reaction to the dissonance of his touch. "I have to go," he continued, his eyes darting toward the horizon. "Vanderbilt needs some documents signed, sealed, and delivered by tonight. It is absolute madness, but it's par for the course," I finished for him, the sweetness in my voice a carefully crafted mask that even startled me. He blinked, a flicker of genuine bewilderment crossing his features, as if he were unaccustomed to me being so compliant, so hollow. "Exactly," he said, clutching at the reprieve. "I am so sorry." He pressed a brief, perfunctory kiss to my cheek, leaving behind the ghost of his expensive cologne. "Give Claire my love and my apologies. Next dinner is entirely on me." And just like that, amidst the laughter and the clinking of glasses that marked my sister's most sacred day, he dissolved into the shadows. I stood there, a spectator in my own life, watching his figure retreat between the long, opulent tables. He waved once, a gesture so practiced it felt choreographed, while his other hand was already fishing for his phone, his thumb tapping out a frantic rhythm against the screen before he had even cleared the tent. The night stretched on, a tedious parade of joy I could not participate in. Long past midnight, under a sky bruised with moonlight, Sarah drove me home. Daniel, claiming the urgency of his work, had taken his own car. When I stepped into the silence of our garage, his black Audi sat motionless, its sleek frame gleaming coldly under the harsh fluorescent lights. I drifted toward it, a moth drawn to a dark flame, needing to touch the metallic skin of the vehicle. I needed to feel the residual heat of the engine, a tangible physical proof that he had truly been there, that his frantic departure was anchored in a reality I could grasp. The driver's side door hung slightly ajar, a minor breach of protocol for a man as fastidious as Daniel. He must have been deeply distracted, his mind elsewhere, his guard lowered. I climbed inside, the air trapped within the cabin thick and stifling, saturated with the pungent, lingering scent of his cologne. As I reached for the handle to close the door, my eyes caught a sliver of white on the passenger seat, half concealed beneath the heavy weight of the car manual. I pulled it out. A small rectangular receipt from the bar at the Drake Hotel. 2 coffees, a mineral water, and a club sandwich. The date was last night. The time 10:47 p.m. It had been settled with his personal credit card. I stood in the hollow silence of the garage, the scrap of paper suddenly feeling as heavy as a lead weight in my palm. My mind raced, clawing for 1,000 innocuous explanations. A late-night meeting, an unexpected client from out of town. But a cold primal instinct, sharp as a shard of glass, whispered that none of those were the truth. The Drake was miles from his office, and at 11 at night, a club sandwich for 2 was not a business transaction. It was a late-night communion for someone occupied with other intentions. I tucked the receipt into the deepest recess of my purse, as if sealing away a contagion. I did not shed a tear. There was no grief yet, only a profound freezing numbness. I climbed the stairs to our silent, vaulted penthouse, and that night, for the first time in 7 years, I retreated to the guest bedroom, drawing the door shut against the man who had become a stranger. The following days became a grim exercise in morbid observation. I began to map the fractures in our life. I detected the faint, sweet, and utterly foreign scent of a perfume on the jackets he left draped over the dining chair. I watched his reactions deepen into paranoia. One night, while we sat in the artificial glow of the television, his phone chirped with a notification. He flipped it face down with such violent force that the screen cracked, his excuse of an annoying client sounding like dust hitting a coffin lid. He changed his laptop password, the password that had been our anniversary date for years, and suddenly the fortress of our intimacy had new impenetrable walls. The final blow, however, fell from an angle I had never anticipated. Paige, a college friend ensconced in the high-stakes world of corporate consulting, invited me for drinks at a rooftop bar in Wicker Park. We sat amidst the clatter of ice and the murmur of city life, discussing the mundane work, mutual friends, the slow decay of our youth, until she began to trace the rim of her glass with a finger. She looked at me with an expression of performative casualness that I saw through immediately. "Hey, I saw you the other day," she said, her voice dropping an octave. Or rather, I saw Daniel. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It stopped entirely, sinking into a cavern of dread. "Oh, really? Where?" "At that trendy new spot on the Riverwalk," she continued, her eyes searching mine for a reaction I was struggling to suppress. "He was with a group from his firm, I think, but there was this woman, a tall brunette in a red dress. They looked like they were having an incredible time, totally absorbed in each other." She paused, her gaze lingering on my face, and in the depth of her eyes I saw, flickered with a fragile, glass-like hesitation, mirroring the exact same brand of sorrowful concern I had witnessed in Sarah's eyes during the wedding. It was a look that begged me to be blind, a silent plea for me to maintain the illusion of my own happiness. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice thinning into a brittle thread. "They seemed close, but hey, I am sure it was just a work thing, right?" She reached for her drink again, the ice clinking a frantic, hollow rhythm against the crystal. "Sure, just a work thing." I repeated the mantra like a prayer to a hollow god, my own voice sounding thin and alien in my ears. I nodded, though my throat felt as if I had swallowed a handful of dry desert sand. "Yeah, for sure. Those team dinners, the late-night strategies, the grind of the industry." But beneath the mask of my composure, the gears of my mind were grinding with a terrifying, agonizing clarity. The jagged shards of a puzzle I had been desperate to ignore were suddenly snapping together, locking into a portrait of betrayal. The forgotten hotel receipt crumpled in the trash, the inexplicable hours he kept, the lingering scent of floral perfume on his collar that never matched my own, and that name, Chloe Miller, a name he had spoken in tones of professional reverence that now sounded like a jagged knife. That night, lying beside him, I watched the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. He had come home at a respectable hour, carrying the scent of red wine and savory pasta, A performance of normalcy that made my skin crawl. I stared at the ceiling until the shadows looked like bars, the doubt that had once been a dormant snake in my stomach now coiling tight, cold and suffocating around my heart. It was no longer enough to be the observer, the passive victim of his charade. The Eleanor who trusted blindly, who saw a business dinner and believed in the sanctity of a corporate career, had died somewhere in the expanse between that Drake Hotel receipt and the pity etched into Paige's features. Something inside me snapped. A brittle internal architecture of resignation shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The icy hollow numbness I would later come to associate with the metallic echo of a hotel parking garage began to take root in my marrow. The next morning, when the front door clicked shut and his voice drifted back, promising another late night, my love, I did not retreat to the window to weep. I marched to my laptop, my fingers trembling with the adrenaline of a woman who had finally stepped off the edge, navigated to a blank browser. With a steely, lethal determination, I typed, "Private Investigator Chicago." The following Sunday arrived, suffocated by the cloying scent of roasting meat and the heavy metallic tang of unconfessed guilt. The air in my mother's home in Eston was thick with the aroma of pot roast and the sharp, piney scent of the yard. Yet beneath it all lay something denser, a silent, suffocating expectation that had blanketed the house the moment I entered alone. "Daniel is working on a Sunday again?" my mother asked, her eyes scanning my face with the precision of a surgeon. I kissed her cheek, smelling the familiar, comforting lavender soap, but it did nothing to soothe the dread. My mother Martha pressed her lips into a thin white line, a gesture that spoke volumes. It was her way of shielding me, a silent admission that she smelled the rot of a lie even if she refused to give it a name. My father, Edward, did not even look up from his book. He merely grunted over his spectacles, a man who saw the world as a series of work ethics and wasted lives. It was Sarah, my sister, who stood as the sentinel of my grief. She sat at the dining table, nursing a glass of red wine, her gaze locking onto mine with a fierce protective fire. Her look was an indictment, a whispered promise. "If that bastard has broken you, I will hunt him down." The meal progressed as a chaotic, jarring symphony. The squeals of my brother Paul's children, the relentless drone of my sister-in-law Anna's, complaints about the PTA, and my father's pontificating. My mother piled our plates with thick slices of roast, trying to drown the mounting tension in rivers of gravy. It was during the dessert course, as the scent of a homemade cherry pie wafted from the kitchen, that the bomb was dropped, detonating with a quiet, devastating precision. "Hey, Nora," my mother said, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped them on her apron, her gaze fixed on the table. "The other day, I ran into Linda, the mother of Daniel's friend." "What's his name?" "Mark." "Anyway, I ran into Linda at Nordstrom. She told me she saw Daniel a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday afternoon at the Music Box Theater with some friends." She left the sentence hanging, a jagged piece of debris in the center of the table that no one dared touch. A sudden vacuum-like silence swallowed the room. Even the children paused, their forks suspended in the air. Sarah let her fork clatter onto her plate with a sharp, metallic ring that seemed to signal the final collapse of my world. Plate with a sharp clink, a sudden metallic discordance that pierced the thick, suffocating tension like a blade. "Oh, really?" I asked, the words feeling brittle and strange against my tongue as I took a bite of the pie, the sweetness of the cherries now tasting like bitter, gray ash upon my palate. He never mentioned a word of it to me. I clung to that small, pathetic defense as if it were a life raft in a rising storm. And which friends was he supposedly with? My mother began gathering the plates, her movements slightly too hurried, her gaze deliberately drifting toward the window as if the answers were hidden somewhere in the evening shadows. "She didn't specify," she replied, her voice lacking its usual warmth, sounding hollow and rehearsed. "Just mentioned he was with a younger crowd, that's all." I suppose I simply assumed the two of you were orchestrating some sort of surprise or had forgotten to extend an invitation to us old folks." She offered a laugh then, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a jagged, forced sound that scraped against the silence of the room. I felt a sudden hot surge of defensive instinct rising in my throat. "Daniel has a multitude of obligations, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the air with a chilling artificial precision. It was too cold, too controlled, a mask of professionalism I had been wearing for far too long. "He's buried in work, you know how these high-stakes firms operate." My father chimed in then, his voice booming with a false sense of relief, clearly desperate to steer the ship away from these treacherous, unspoken shoals. "Work must always come first, that's the way of the world. Pass the wine, Edward, would you?" Yet, my mother was not a woman to let a scent of blood vanish into the ether. As she assisted Anna in clearing the remaining clutter toward the kitchen, she snagged my gaze with a look that was supposedly nonchalant, but radiated an unsettling intensity. "Eleanor, honey," she murmured, her voice dripping with a faux sweet concern. "Come give your mother a hand with the coffee, will you? You've always had a better touch with the brew than I do." It was a trap as transparent as glass, and yet like a moth drawn to a guttering flame. I stood up and followed her. Within the sterile, white-tiled expanse of the kitchen, the low, rhythmic hum of the coffee maker served as our only audience, a droning pulse that seemed to measure the thumping of my own heart. The maternal mask dropped instantly. My mother leaned her back against the cool marble of the counter, crossed her arms tightly over her chest, and fixed me with a piercing, unwavering stare. "What is truly happening, honey?" "There is nothing to tell, Mom," I insisted, though my voice lacked conviction. "Do not lie to me," she countered, her voice dropping into a register of grim, hard-won wisdom. "You have carried the countenance of someone attending their own funeral for these past weeks, and you arrived here tonight entirely alone, just as you have for so long. Is it that Chloe girl? The one Sarah whispered about in the parlor?" I mentally cursed my sister, a flash of irritation warring with my exhaustion, even as a part of me recognized the jagged edge of her genuine concern. "Sarah really needs to mind her own business," I muttered, turning away to stare at the steaming percolator. "Sarah minds your business because that is the sacred burden of being a sister," she retorted, moving closer until I could smell the faint, familiar scent of her perfume. "And I am your mother. You will tell me exactly who this woman is." The dam finally broke. The months of suppressed agony, the suffocating suspicion, the cold, creeping realization that had been gnawing at my soul like an infestation, it all erupted in a harsh, jagged whisper. "She is the daughter of Harrison Miller, Daniel's senior partner, the newest protege at his firm. She is 28, fresh-faced and naive, and apparently, she harbors a penchant for pretentious indie films and the anonymity of inexpensive motels." My mother's expression withered, the light fading from her face. She didn't look shocked. She looked utterly, devastatingly resigned, as if she had been dreading the arrival of this specific catastrophe for a lifetime, yet had always known the clock was ticking toward this very moment. "Oh, Eleanor," she whispered, and in the harsh overhead light, she suddenly looked every bit her 65 years, the lines of her face deepening with the weight of long-buried ghosts. "These men, they are all cut from the same flawed cloth." "No, Mom," I snapped, a spark of defiance lighting up my misery. "Not all men are the same, and this is not merely boys being boys. This is my husband, the man I pledged my life to, systematically dismantling our world through lies, stepping out into the shadows with someone else, and making a pathetic laughingstock of me." "Are you absolutely certain?" she asked, and beneath her stern exterior, I caught a fleeting, haunting glimmer of a desperate, pathetic hope. Perhaps it is a colossal misunderstanding. Young women are so often dangerously, thoughtlessly friendly, and men often misinterpret or worse get foolish ideas. "I am not a child, and I am certainly not stupid," I hissed, my voice rising in a sharp crescendo. The sudden outburst made Anna, who was stepping through the doorway with a tray of used plates, jump violently and retreat hastily back into the shadows of the hallway. I have evidence, Mom. Well, nearly. I am in the process of ensuring it. My mother stepped forward, her skin crepey and cool as she placed her wrinkled hands firmly over mine, pinning my knuckles to the counter where I had been gripping the edge as if it were the rail of a sinking ship. Listen to me, my love, she whispered, her voice a fragile entreaty. Even if this hideous thing were true, these occurrences, they are part of the landscape. They happen far more frequently than you would ever dare to imagine. Your father, she faltered, her throat working as she swallowed hard against an invisible knot. Well, that is of no consequence right now. What remains paramount is the architecture of this family, the life you have painstakingly constructed. 7 years, Eleanor. A beautiful, enviable penthouse, a life that people dream of. Are you prepared to cast all of that into the pyre for the sake of a fleeting, shallow infatuation? I stared at her, frozen in a state of absolute, hollow disbelief, not merely because of the pragmatism of her plea, but because of the ancient, jagged sorrow that suddenly welled up in her eyes, a mirror of my own. In that instant, 1,000 fragments of my childhood, the hushed, vitriolic arguments behind locked doors, the sudden, unexplained absences of my father in the dead of night, the pervasive, melancholic sadness that used to wrap around my mother like an unwanted shawl, all clicked into place with a sickening, bitter clarity. Dad? I asked, the word catching in my throat as the realization dawned, although the answer was already etched in the lines of her weary face. She turned her head, avoiding my gaze, staring instead at the steam rising from the coffee pot. It was a lifetime ago, she murmured, a secretary of foolish transient error. But I endured it, Eleanor. I bore the weight for you and the children, for the sake of this house, for the sanctity of the family unit. And look at us now, we remain together. Your father is a fundamentally good man. In the twilight of their existence, they all succumb to their inherent, tragic weaknesses. I felt a wave of nausea, not disgust, but a sudden visceral panic that clawed at my throat. Was this truly the blueprint of my future? To endure, to bow my head in silence while my spirit withered, to eventually transform into this hollowed-out, resilient yet broken woman who sat before me, her eyes clouded with a lifetime of compromises and pleading for me to follow her tragic lead? A shudder racked my frame. I am not you, Mom, I whispered, and though my voice trembled like a leaf caught in a gale, it did not shatter. I refused to let it shatter. I am not going to endure it. I am not going to play the charade of a happy home, while my husband breathes the scent of another woman on his skin. I am not going to maintain a facade of perfection just so the neighbors can sleep soundly, unaware of the rot beneath our floorboards. It is your life you are going to destroy, she hissed, her voice cracking under the weight of a sudden sharp anger. Do you even have the slightest grasp of what it means to be a divorced woman at your age? You will be drifting, an anchorless ghost moving back into the cramped room of your childhood, bearing the weight of those pitying glances from relatives who think they know your worth. Your finances will lie in ruins, a tangled mess of legal fees and loneliness. And if you still dream of children, remember that the clock is not waiting for your moral awakenings. It is ticking, indifferent and unrelenting. Every word she flung at me felt like a jagged piece of glass, but as they pierced, something strange occurred. Instead of weakening my resolve, each knife was honing it, sharpening my will into a fine, lethal edge. I would prefer the cold, biting pity of the world over the searing, relentless fire of my own self-loathing. I countered, firmly pulling my hands away from hers, as if shedding the weight of her history. And I am not moving back into this house. I have carved out my own path. I have my career, my savings, and my own dignity. I have Sarah. Sarah, my mother exclaimed, spitting the name out as if it were a foul-tasting insult, a stain on the lineage she desperately tried to preserve. Right. Your sister, the militant feminist, the one who wastes her life with her girlfriend and splashes paint onto canvases that the world will never buy. She is your source of wisdom? Of course. A woman who couldn't even manage the basic task of keeping a man by her side is going to offer you marriage advice. The kitchen door swung open with a violent thud. Sarah stood there, her fists clenched white at her sides, her eyes blazing with a fury that could have ignited the very air we breathed. She had heard every syllable. A woman doesn't have to keep a man by her side, Mom. As if he were a houseplant or a stray dog waiting for a scrap of kindness, Sarah said, her voice possessed by a calm that was far more terrifying than any scream. And for your information, Emily and I have been together for 12 years, longer than many of the marriages you claim are successful. And in all that time we don't cheat on each other. That seems to be a level of integrity that simply cannot be said for this household. My mother went deathly pale, shrinking into her chair. Don't you dare speak like that in my presence. This is my house and Eleanor is your sister and she is hurting. Instead of offering her support, you dare tell her to shut up and accept her lot just as you did? Well, no, she isn't you. She possesses a spine that you clearly abandoned years ago. The sound of a plate shattering against the dining room floor startled the three of us into silence. It was my father. He had poked his head into the kitchen, and on his face, usually a mask of impenetrable serene indifference, was a haunting collision of deep-seated shame and suppressed boiling rage. You are all gossiping about things that are none of your business. He roared, his eyes darting toward my mother. Leave her alone, Martha. Eleanor is an adult woman. Let her do what she needs to do, and you, what would you know of anything, really? My mother shot back, turning on him with a ferocity that must have been festering in the dark corners of her soul for decades. You who were never present even when you were in the room. You who... Enough. My voice cut through the stagnant air like a blade through silk. Everyone froze. The room descended into a sudden, suffocating silence as they all turned to look at me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with an atmosphere thick with the ghosts of family resentment, decades of buried secrets, and the heavy inherited lies we had all been forced to swallow. Enough, I repeated, my tone steadying. Mom, I love you, but I will never live my life the way you chose to live yours. Dad, I have no words left for you. No anger, no tears, just an empty space where respect used to be. Sarah, thank you. I grabbed my purse from the hook, my fingers still dancing with tremors, but my heart was now a fortress. I am leaving, and I will not discuss this any further with any of you until I decide the terms, the how, and the when. Daniel and I have ghosts to confront, and we will confront them. Without the interference of family committees, without the weight of unsolicited wisdom, and certainly without the comfort of pot roasts used to bury the truth. I walked toward the door, my steps rhythmic and intentional. Nobody dared to reach out or stop me. At the threshold, I paused and turned back. My mother was weeping in the silence of her surrender. My father stared at the floor, a man hollowed out by his own choices. Only Sarah held my gaze, and within those familiar eyes, I saw a fierce, unyielding pride. It was absolute solidarity. One more thing, Mom, I said, my voice soft yet resonant in the foyer. It isn't just a little fling. It is the end of a marriage that should have ended long ago. And I am the one who decides how it closes. I walked out into the foyer, pushing past the heavy door and stepping into the Sunday afternoon sun. The air felt sweet, clean, and impossibly vast. It no longer carried the cloying scent of roasting meat and the sour musk of domestic guilt. It smelled of something entirely new, freedom. It was a terrifying, jagged, and painful freedom, but for the first time in my life it was mine. Nonetheless, in the hollow of my palm, my phone pulsed with a sharp, insistent vibration, a digital heartbeat of a life I was already beginning to outgrow. I retrieved it, the screen illuminating to reveal a message from Daniel, glowing with a soft, insidious luminescence. Finishing up soon. Let's grab dinner. I miss you. Those words, once the anchor of my security, now landed with the weight of a stone in a shallow pond. They were a bright, easy lie, polished and practiced, designed to keep the status quo undisturbed. Yet, as I stared at the message, the tempest of my previous hours subsided. I felt no jagged edges of pain, no corrosive heat of anger, only a chilling crystalline clarity that seemed to sharpen the world around me. I did not type a response. I did not offer the customary lie in return. I simply slipped the phone into the darkness of my purse, disconnected from the deceit. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the interior still holding the lingering scent of my own hesitation. Before the ignition could roar to life, I retrieved my planner, its pages filled with the mundane schedules of a life I was methodically dismantling. My fingers traced a jagged line of ink, stopping at a number I had recorded days ago with a trembling hand, the fruit of feverish late-night online searches. It was the contact for Michael Rossi, a private investigator vouched for by a friend from law school. A woman who had weathered her own brutal dissolution of marriage and knew that justice, like law, was often found in the shadows. Rossi. Discreet investigations. I did not allow myself the luxury of a second thought, nor would I permit the lingering ghost of my mother's resignation to anchor me to the status quo. I dialed. The phone rang twice, a hollow rhythmic sound that felt like the tolling of a bell marking the death of my old self, before a voice, deep and devoid of ornamentation, answered. Rossi. My own voice, sounding detached and strangely serene, detached from the frantic thrumming of my heart, spoke into the quiet cabin. Good afternoon. This is Eleanor Bennett. I need your services. The office of Michael Rossi was an assault on the senses, a stark departure from the polished mahogany and curated silence of my existence. It smelled aggressively of scorched coffee and the cloying synthetic sweetness of vanilla-flavored vape smoke. Located in a weary architectural relic of the 1970s in Wrigleyville, it sat just blocks from the roar of Wrigley Field. Yet the world here felt stagnant, untouched by the frantic pace of the financial district. The waiting room was a narrow corridor of neglect, adorned with a chipped Formica table and stacks of auto magazines that had long since lost their relevance. It was a world away from the pristine glass and brushed steel of Daniel's prestigious law firm, where the air was always conditioned to a perfect chilling degree. Mrs. Bennett, go on in, the receptionist signaled. A middle-aged woman whose reading glasses hung from a gold chain like a pendulum, marking the passage of wasted time. Michael Rossi was the antithesis of the cinematic archetype. He was a man who seemed to have been eroded by time, his hair retreating across his scalp and his midsection pressing firmly against the confines of a plaid shirt that had seen better decades. A corduroy jacket, brown and weary, was draped over his chair like a discarded skin. When he stood, his handshake was dry, firm, and entirely transactional. Have a seat, please. He gestured to a chair opposite a desk that served as a graveyard for folders and a laptop that looked like a relic of a different era. You said this was a matrimonial surveillance matter? Yes. I nodded, anchoring myself by clutching my purse against my knees, as if it were a shield against the exposure of my own life. Now that I was sitting in this grim, functional room, a place that served as a formal acknowledgement that my marriage had descended into the realm of the illicit, reality descended upon me with the force of a physical blow. I swallowed, the taste of ash in my mouth. I believe my husband is being unfaithful. I need proof. Rossi offered no performative sympathy, no tilted head of practiced concern. He simply reached for a notebook, his expression as neutral as a blank page. I understand. It is a difficult situation. Tell me what makes you suspicious. And then the dam broke. My voice, which had begun as a fragile whisper, found a new hard rhythm. I laid it all out. The endless business dinners that stretched into the small hours, the incriminating receipt from the Drake, the lingering ghost of a foreign perfume on his lapel, the girl in red, and the name that had become a poison in my mind, Chloe Miller, the daughter of his firm's most formidable senior partner. Rossi captured every detail, his pen skittering across the paper in a frantic, tiny shorthand that seemed to reduce my tragedy to a set of manageable data points. "Do you have a photo of your husband and of Miss Miller?" "If you have one." I handed him my phone, watching as he stared at the image of Daniel, frozen in a moment of family joy that now felt like a cruel caricature. For Chloe, I offered only a screenshot of a LinkedIn profile. A clinical professional headshot that failed to hide the confident, almost defiant tilt of her smile. Rossi studied it for a long silent moment. "I know her, or rather I know of her," he muttered, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. "Her father, Harrison Miller, is a heavy hitter. He has interests all over Chicago." He looked up, his gaze meeting mine with a sobering intensity. "This could complicate things. People with power tend to be careful. I don't want trouble. I just want the truth. The truth has a price, Mrs. Miller. And sometimes that price isn't just financial." He set his pen aside and slid a printed brochure across the desk toward me. "Basic surveillance, weekly reports, photographic or video evidence if it's possible and legal. Everything is strictly confidential. You sign an NDA, I deliver results. If we're talking about tapping computers or phones, that's another service. More expensive and rife with legal risks. I don't recommend it as a first step." I read the figures listed on the paper. They were steep, a mountain of digits that would have once made me blanch, but they were not prohibitive. I realized then that I had been unknowingly preparing for this moment, carefully hoarding my own portion of our joint account, sheltering a reserve of independence that I had initially intended to use to remodel the kitchen would now be used to dynamite the foundation of my marriage. The irony was suffocating. I was essentially financing my own wreckage, turning the hearth that was meant to nurture our future into the very explosive that would shatter the past. "All right, just surveillance for now," I whispered, the words tasting of bile and resolve. I grabbed the fountain pen he offered, its weight feeling like a leaden anchor in my palm, and signed the paperwork. As the document slid back across the mahogany desk, my hand felt surprisingly steady, a calm born not of peace, but of a frozen hollow terror. I looked him in the eye, my voice devoid of the tremor that had plagued me for months. "I want to know where he goes, who he is with, how much time he spends with her. I want everything down to the last second of his duplicity." He nodded, a man accustomed to the debris of shattered lives. "You will have your first report in 48 hours, he promised, standing up to signal that our transaction was complete. "But before you go, Mrs. Miller, a piece of advice. While this investigation is underway, act completely normal. No questions, no snooping, no blow-ups. Be cold, be smart. People who have something to hide are their most careless when they believe the world is looking the other way." I walked out of that office into the midday glare feeling entirely altered, carrying the heavy, visceral sensation of being both stained by the filth of this betrayal and empowered by the scalpel I had just bought to dissect it. I had crossed a threshold, shedding the skin of the suspicious, grieving wife to become a client, a hunter stalking the truth in the shadows of my own home. The next 2 weeks became an elaborate, exhausting theater of the absurd. My life was no longer lived, it was performed. Every morning I forced my lips into the gentle arc of a doting spouse, offering Daniel a smile that felt like cracked porcelain as I poured his coffee. I asked about his day, feigning interest in the labyrinthine details of the Vanderbilt case, nodding with practiced rhythmic precision as he spun his increasingly tangled web of lies. There was the dinner with Japanese clients at Alania, a fabrication I catalogued with a mental tally, then the firm team-building weekend in Lake Geneva, a ghost of an event that existed only in his deceit. I meticulously noted every contradiction, every slight variation in his tone, and retreated to the solitude of my office to compare his fabrications with the concise, devastating reports that flickered into a secure, encrypted email account I had carved out of the digital void. Daniel Miller, Day 1, Thursday. The prose was clinical, stripped of all humanity, which only made it more agonizing. Exits law firm at 7:45 p.m. takes a taxi to Bouquet Restaurant. Meets Miss Chloe Miller, 28 years old. ID attached at 8:15 p.m. Dinner lasts approximately 2 hours. Observable behavior. Frequent physical closeness, laughter, holding hands across the linen. Exit together at 10:30 p.m. Take taxi headed north toward the Gold Coast, exiting on Astor Street to enter a residential building. Subject exits alone at 12:47 a.m. 12 photographs attached. The images were grainy, smudged shadows captured by a long-lens camera in the dark, yet they were undeniable. There was Daniel, his face illuminated by a soft, intimate glow as he leaned in toward her, a gesture of tenderness I hadn't felt from him in years. And her, laughter caught in her throat, fingers brushing his arm in a rhythm of domestic belonging. A quick search of the Astor Street address confirmed my worst suspicions. It was a luxury rental, a sanctuary of silk and secrets, their love nest, or perhaps just a cage I was subsidizing with my silence. The second report arrived on Tuesday, day 6, a heavier blow than the first. Subject exits work at 6 p.m. drives his personal Audi A6 to Water Tower Place, meeting Miss Miller in the subterranean darkness of the garage. She enters the vehicle, and they remain there for 25 minutes, a suffocating interval of isolation before they drive to the Monarch Hotel. They enter through separate doors 5 minutes apart, a pathetic attempt at discretion that fooled no one. The subject exits alone at 10:15 p.m. 8 photographs, plus a video excerpt. The short, shaky footage was a visceral assault. Seeing him, my husband, walking into that hotel lobby with such furtive predatory determination felt like a physical blow to my gut. There was no more room for the fragile comfort of doubt or the cruel hope of a misunderstanding. The truth was nothing more than a cold, irrefutable sequence of pixels, a digital witness to my obsolescence. The final piece of the puzzle came via a phone call from Michael Rossi. "Mrs. Miller, I have some additional information you might find interesting," he began, his voice as professional and detached as a coroner. "We ran a financial trace using public data. Your husband has been making monthly transfers from a secondary, hidden account to a lease agreement under Chloe Miller's name at the Astor Street address. It has been active for 7 months. 7 months. My mind raced backward, tracing the lines of his betrayal across the calendar of my life. It wasn't a slip-up, an impulsive lapse in judgment. It was a double life, a construction of reality built on the foundation of our marriage. There were also records of purchases at jewelers and boutiques, extravagant gifts that were never meant for me. He waited for my reaction, his neutral tone piercing through my numbness. Would you like us to dig deeper? We can attempt to access more detailed bank statements, but it carries a higher legal risk. I heard his voice from a great distance, as if through a long dark tunnel. My reply was whispered, stripped of all emotion, sounding eerily serene. No, I said, I have seen enough. Send me everything you have, please, and prepare the final invoice. I hung up. I didn't need anything else. I held the scattered shards of my reality in my hands, pieces of an ugly, vulgar puzzle that, when finally fitted together, revealed the grotesque tableau of a rotting marriage. The silence that filled our bedroom felt heavy, suffocating, yet I welcomed it as the funeral shroud for the woman I had been until 5 minutes ago. That same afternoon, with the sun casting long, mocking shadows across the hardwood floor and the certainty that Daniel would be tethered to his boardroom meetings until well past dusk, I made 2 phone calls. My fingers moved with a calculated, robotic precision that felt entirely detached from my soul. The first was to the office of Olivia Vance, a family law attorney known for her predatory instincts in the courtroom. She was the same tiger Daniel had aggressively recommended the year before when I had dealt with a tedious HOA dispute, boasting of her prowess. The irony was so acidic, so sharp and corrosive, that I could almost taste the metallic tang of it on my tongue. Olivia, it's Eleanor Miller. I need to see you. It's urgent and it's about Daniel. There was a flicker of hesitation on the other end, a brief, professional silence that acknowledged the gravity of my tone. Then the direct, unyielding voice of the lawyer cut through. Come by tomorrow first thing at 8 a.m. through the back door if you prefer discretion. I acknowledged the arrangement and severed the connection, immediately dialing the second number, the private line of my wealth manager. Kevin, it's Eleanor. I need you to immediately freeze all the joint accounts, the savings, and the line of credit. Only keep my personal account active. My voice was devoid of the tremor of panic. It was the voice of a commander ordering a scorched earth policy. Yes, it's an order from a joint account holder. No, my husband is not available right now. It is a preventive security measure. I will explain everything in person soon. Yes, right now, please. I hung up, letting the phone slip onto the silk duvet. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady, anchored by the weight of my resolve. My heart was beating at a rapid but steady rhythm, like a war drum echoing in a deep canyon. There was no more fear, no more frantic searching for excuses or hope. There was only a cold metallic determination that flowed through my veins like ice water. I had moved from the haze of suspicion to the clarity of evidence, and from evidence, I had transitioned into the cold comfort of action. That night, Daniel drifted home near midnight, bringing with him the suffocating scent of the cold night air and a faint, cloying trace of sweet perfume that certainly did not belong to me. He performed his practiced routine, faking exhaustion with an actor's flair. A disaster, babe. These Japanese executives are relentless. What did you do tonight? I was sitting on the sofa, a book open on my lap, the pages merely a prop to hide my dissection of his soul. The lights were dimmed, casting him in a flattering, deceptive glow. I looked up and looked at him, not just seeing the surface but truly looking at him perhaps for the first time in months. I saw the tiny, almost imperceptible smudge of lipstick on the collar of his crisp white shirt, a crimson stain on his integrity. I saw the slight puffiness under his eyes, not the mark of exhaustion, but the remnants of the contained euphoria of a man who had just stolen a few hours with his mistress. I saw the stranger living in my house, draped in the skin of my husband. Oh, nothing important, I said, clearing my throat and offering a smile. It was a calm, hollow smile, the smile of someone who has already drawn an irreversible line in the sand. Just house stuff. The calm I had felt after freezing the accounts and meeting with the lawyer lasted exactly 48 hours. It was a strange electric calm, like the charged atmosphere that precedes a violent storm, where the birds stop singing and the air grows thin. Played my part to perfection. I made dinner, asked about his day, and listened to his increasingly elaborate lies with a perfectly molded, plastic smile that never reached my eyes. It was like living inside a glass bubble, watching the outside world distort and fragment, knowing with a terrifying certainty that at any moment it could shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. The explosion happened on a Tuesday afternoon while I was folding freshly ironed laundry in the bedroom, the smell of lavender detergent masking the scent of betrayal. My phone, tossed carelessly on the bed, buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, an area code from New York. An instinctive, icy chill ran down my spine before I even swiped to accept the call. Yes, hello, I said, my voice maintaining a neutral, hollow plateau. Eleanor Miller. The voice on the other end was female, young, self-assured, and possessed of an educated accent, the kind learned in expensive prep schools and polished during semesters abroad. Speaking, who is this? It's Chloe Miller. The air seemed to vanish from the room, leaving me gasping as if the very oxygen had been sucked out by the vacuum of her existence. I looked around wildly as if the room, our sanctuary, our bedroom, could offer me some kind of refuge from the intrusion. It couldn't. Everywhere I looked were the remnants of a life built on sand. Stacks of Daniel's white shirts, his carefully folded trousers, the Cartier watch I had bought him for our last anniversary sitting mockingly on the nightstand. An entire life packaged in domestic routines that suddenly seemed grotesque and alien. Chloe Miller, I repeated, and I was surprised by how steady, how chillingly calm I sounded. The coldness I had been cultivating like a weapon activated instantly, turning my blood to liquid nitrogen. Harrison Miller's daughter, the spoiled, bright-eyed newest addition to my husband's law firm, and apparently the newest complication in a narrative I was about to rewrite. There was a brief, heavy pause hung between us, stretching across the digital abyss like a taut wire ready to snap. It was as if she were gathering the shattered fragments of her composure, stunned that I had dismantled her mask of anonymity with such surgical precision. "It's about Daniel," she finally blurted out, her voice sharpening, losing that initial, polished sheen. "And it's about us." The word us. It landed in my palm like a jagged piece of glass, a two-letter syllable that contained the entire, suffocating weight of my shattered marriage. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned the color of bone. I didn't flinch. Instead, I clutched that pain, that betrayal like a weapon, letting the jagged edge slice into my resolve until I felt nothing but a cold, clear clarity. "Us?" I repeated, my voice a blade wrapped in velvet, coated with a layer of frost so thick it could freeze the very air in the room. "You and Daniel Foreman? How remarkably endearing. How poetic. It must be so wonderfully complex for you, with him keeping his life partitioned like a secret garden, coming home to me at night, and then retreating to your shadow world. Tell me, Chloe, where exactly do you exist when he isn't playing the devoted husband? Is it that pristine little nest on Astor Street? The one he maintains with such clandestine care?" The silence on the other end was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of my bedroom. I could hear the faint, frantic hitch of her breath, the telltale sound of someone realizing the walls of their sanctuary had been breached. She was shaking, I realized. The girl who thought she could walk into a life and claim it as her own was unraveling. "Have you been following me?" she whispered, the bravado dripping away, replaced by a shrill, nervous tremor. "There's no need to chase someone who never learned how to hide," I lied, my voice steady, savoring the way her uncertainty mirrored my own internal chaos. In that moment, a flicker of cold intuition sparked. My thumb moved with mechanical, detached precision across the glass. I tapped the screen, hitting the call record button. A tiny rhythmic red icon began to pulse on my display. A singular crimson heartbeat. Olivia Vance's voice echoed in my memory. "Record everything, Eleanor. Especially the silences." "But tell me, Chloe," I prompted, my tone deceptively soft, "what is so burning, so vital, that you felt the need to pick up the phone and reach out to your lover's wife?" "I am not his mistress," she spat back, a desperate attempt to reclaim the high ground, though the effort sounded hollow, brittle. "We are something more. It is complicated, Eleanor. You wouldn't understand." "Oh, of course, the complexity of it all," I mused, pacing the room. "How it must be complicated to coordinate dinner reservations at Bouquet, to schedule those stolen afternoons at the Music Box Theater, or to keep track of the check-in times at the Monarch Hotel. The truth sounds rather pedestrian to me, Chloe. It sounds like a script I've seen 1,000 times before. This isn't a game, Eleanor. What we have is real. It's serious. Daniel and I are in love." The word love hit me with the physical force of a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. The air left my lungs in a sharp, jagged gasp, but I refused to buckle. I stood taller, my posture hardening into a fortress. The pile of Daniel's folded laundry, once a symbol of my devotion, lay discarded and forgotten at my feet, a pathetic relic of a lie. "In love," I echoed, and then I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound devoid of mirth, cutting through the silence like a razor. How beautiful, how devastatingly young. "Tell me, when did this grand romance sprout its roots? 7 months ago? Was it when he signed the lease on that apartment for you? Or did the rot set in even earlier? Did he tuck you into your father's firm like a hidden prize, just to keep you within arm's reach?" "He didn't hide me," she shrieked, the mask finally shattering. For the first time, I heard the raw, jagged edge of genuine fury in her voice. "I have a master's from Harvard. I earned my place. And what a serendipitous twist of fate that your father is the senior partner," I countered, my voice dripping with honeyed acid. And how marvelously coincidental that your direct supervisor happens to be Daniel, and that you require so many intimate, private meetings to review simple contracts. It must be an incredibly demanding, exhausting career, Chloe. You're just bitter, she hissed, her tone veering into cruel mockery. You can't hold on to him if he doesn't want you. Can't you see it? He stayed with you out of habit, out of a hollow sense of obligation. I give him everything you never could. I give him life. The heat of 1,000 suns flared in my chest, a white-hot rage that threatened to consume me. But I swallowed it down. I would not give her the satisfaction of a tremor in my voice. I leaned closer to the phone, my tone dropping to a whisper that was purely beautifully venomous. And what exactly do you give him, Chloe? Youth? A surname that opens heavy mahogany doors? Tell me, when you're lying in that bed he pays for, does he whisper about how tedious I am? Does he count his blessings that you arrived to save him from the misery of our mortgage? Or does he vent about the suffocating weight of our family obligations, about how exhausting it is to play the part of the devoted husband while he counts the minutes until he can escape to you? She took a sharp, jagged breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. You have no idea what we have. I have every idea, I corrected, my voice chillingly calm. I have the photographs. I have the receipts, the bank statements, the detailed logs from the private investigator who has been tracking your every move for weeks. I know everything, Chloe. I know the exact brand of perfume you wear, the vintage of wine you order at Bouquet, the way you tilt your head when you think no one is watching. I know it all. The silence that followed was heavy, stifling, and suffocating. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. I could feel her terror pulsating through the line. No, she gasped, you can't prove he's using marital funds to finance his little affair, to bankroll the daughter of his own boss. That would destroy him. It would gut the firm's ethics. It would ruin everything. Of course I can, and I will, I whispered. He loves me, she pleaded. But the conviction had bled out of her, leaving her voice thin, fragile, like the whimpering of a scolded child. Daniel only loves himself, Chloe. You are an accessory, an expensive, meticulously curated, and perhaps momentarily exhilarating one, but you are nothing more than an accessory nonetheless. You exist in the margins of his life, a shimmering object he picks up to feel young, to feel powerful, and to feel like the center of his own manufactured universe. But when this fragile facade inevitably blows up, and I promise you, Chloe, it is going to blow up with the force of a tectonic shift, Daddy is not going to be very happy about his daughter playing house with a man who has clearly compromised his professional integrity. Your father's firm, his reputation, his legacy. All of it will crumble because of a middle-aged man's midlife crisis. And when the debris settles, Daniel will have to choose his path. He is a coward by nature. He gravitates toward the safest harbor. Would you truly bet your inheritance, your social standing, and your future that he will choose you? Before she could summon a defense, I delivered the final, calculated blow. It was the masterstroke I had been sharpening since the very first day I stumbled upon her LinkedIn profile, since I traced the digital breadcrumbs of their pathetic affair to its source. By the way, I whispered, voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum, did you know that this weekend, according to his shared calendar, the one he left open on his iPad like a fool, Daniel and I were supposed to go to Lisbon to celebrate our anniversary? He's been waxing poetic about it for weeks, obsessing over the exact suite at the hotel, the reservation at that tucked-away bistro we once loved. He seemed so touchingly excited about our little getaway. The truth was a jagged shard of glass. There were no plans for Lisbon. He hadn't uttered a word about our anniversary in months, yet it was precisely the kind of intimate, cruel detail that could pierce the armor of a mistress who believed she was the protagonist of a grand, sweeping romance. There was a gasp on the other end, a small, choked sound of genuine agony, followed by an oppressive nothingness. He didn't mention it to you? I added, layering my voice with a faux sweetness that dripped like honey over poison. How incredibly strange. He must have simply forgotten what with being so breathless and overwhelmed by his work and all the other distractions. I hung up. My hands were trembling violently, not from fear, but from the electric hum of pure adrenaline, the suffocating weight of betrayal finally being acknowledged, and a wild, painful sense of triumph. The recording was safely stored in the cloud. I had caught her. I had driven the sharp blade of doubt into her rich girl confidence, watching it bleed out in real time. But as I sat in the dim light of the study, the victory tasted like ash, bitter, gray, and utterly hollow. Not even 10 minutes elapsed before the phone chimed again. A shrill, insistent demand for attention. This time, the caller ID displayed the name that had once meant home. Daniel. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, listening to the electronic pulse vibrate against the polished wood of the desk. On the 4th, I picked up. I didn't say a word. Eleanor. His voice was taut, jagged with a frantic agitation that betrayed his composure. What on earth did you say to Chloe? She just called me hysterical, throwing a fit that's rattling the office walls. Hello, honey, I said, my voice possessed of a stillness that must have sounded truly ghostly to him. How was your day? Was it filled with lots of work? Don't you dare screw with me, he snapped. Did you threaten her? Did you tell her you have people watching her? We just had a woman call from the front desk, asking about a tale. She called me, to tell me how deeply in love you two are. It was very enlightening. Truly. I heard him breathing a ragged, uneven sound on the other end of the line. I closed my eyes and pictured him perfectly, sitting in his mahogany-paneled office, his silk tie loosened, his eyes darting toward the door as if he expected his partners to burst in and witness his undoing. He was terrified. She's just a kid, Eleanor, he pleaded, his voice thin. She's confused. She misinterpreted professional attention for something else. It doesn't mean anything, I swear. 7 months of rent, 3-star Michelin dinners, and lazy, indulgent afternoons at the Monarch are quite the definition of professional attention, Daniel. Wow. My firm's client entertainment budget is much tighter than that. I should tell my boss to learn from you. The silence that followed was absolute. A void where his lies usually bloomed. Then a hoarse whisper filled with a primal, naked fear I had never heard from him before. What? What exactly do you know? Everything, Daniel. I know everything. And I have the proof on paper, digitally, and recorded, much like the conversation I just had with your precious, confused child. Are you insane? He bellowed, the sound echoing in the silence of my room. But the yell lacked gravity. It was a desperate, paper-thin facade of authority. You hired a detective? You're spying on me? Watching you. There is a profound difference, isn't there? I was simply monitoring my marital assets, which, as it turns out, were being aggressively invested in an apartment for your mistress, in diamonds, and in international escapades. It is truly breathtaking how many business expenses don't have receipts. Honey, she is my partner's daughter, he shrieked, his voice rising into a panic. It's complicated. If her father finds out that there is friction, he could what, Daniel? Fire you? Leave his spoiled little girl without her shiny new toy? I cut him off, my voice sharp as a guillotine. I had had enough of the circular dance. Listen to me and listen well. I have already frozen all of our joint accounts. I have retained Olivia Vance, and the divorce papers are being drafted at this very moment. And if you do not sign an uncontested divorce and accept the division of assets she proposes, everything I possess, including the recording of Chloe admitting to your tawdry little affair, will end up not just in court, but in Harrison Miller's email inbox at the Bar Association, on your mother's doorstep, and on the front page of the Chicago Tribune if I deem it necessary. No, you can't do that. His voice was reduced to a frayed thread, a pathetic plea for mercy that he had never earned. Of course I can, and I will, unless you do exactly what I command. First thing, you come home right now and sit down, and we are going to have a real conversation, one stripped of the artifice we have lived in for years. No more of your practiced lies, no more of those convenient crocodile tears that used to soften my heart, because I ran out of tears for you months ago. They have dried up, leaving behind only the parched earth of a woman who has finally seen the sun setting on her own innocence. I hung up the phone with a sharp metallic finality. I didn't wait for his stuttering protests. I simply turned off the device, the screen going black, cutting the cord to the lifeline of a man I no longer recognized. I slid down the wall, the cool plaster meeting my back, until I was sitting on the floor amid the piles of folded laundry, the trivial domestic remnants of a life that felt like a museum exhibit from a century ago. My body was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that raced from head to toe as if I were caught in the throes of a high fever. Yet my mind was a sanctuary of crystalline, terrifying clarity. Inside, in some deep, unreachable place, there was a core of perfect ice, unyielding and sharp. Still in that hard, frozen silence, I had spoken the words that sealed our fate. Divorce, lawyer-proof. There was no turning back. The war had begun, a cold and calculated mobilization, and I had just won the first decisive battle. I had stolen the initiative, snatching the reins from his trembling hands. I had stripped him of the illusion of control. Now he was on the defensive, vibrating with a panic that was as palpable as the scent of ozone before a storm. I knew that a scared man is a dangerous man, a cornered animal that bites indiscriminately, but I also knew the precise geometry of Daniel's arrogance, the specific flaws in his armor, his pride, his obsession with his reputation, that would eventually become his undoing. I waited, sitting on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by the wreckage of the life I had built and was now systematically demolishing. I waited for my husband to arrive, preparing to face the man I had shared 7 years with, a man who in that singular agonizing moment felt like a stranger wearing a familiar face. The law firm of Miller, Davis and Associates occupied 2 entire floors of a gleaming sterile high-rise on LaSalle Street, a monument to ambition that boasted spectacular panoramic views of the Chicago River, which coiled like a dark ribbon through the city's heart. It had always seemed deeply ironic to me. So much wealth, so much sterile prestige, all dedicated to solving the complex problems of others, while our own existence rotted from the inside out, hollowed by infidelity and neglect. Today, as I walked through the enormous shimmering glass doors, that irony tasted like bile on the back of my tongue. The receptionist, a young woman whose elegance was as impeccable as her professional mask, offered a smile that didn't reach her carefully lined eyes. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment with Eleanor Bennett to see my husband, Daniel Bennett?" I asked, my voice steady, my pace not faltering for a single heartbeat. My heels clicked against the polished marble of the lobby, a rhythmic, authoritative sound that announced my presence like a drumbeat of war. I was draped in a simple, impeccable pearl gray pantsuit, the fabric sharp and cold. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek bun, the style of a woman who had no time for softness. I was no longer the disheveled, weeping wife. I was a negotiator walking into a boardroom to liquidate an asset. Olivia Vance's voice echoed in my memory. "Your appearance is your first statement. Let it project power, not pain." "Mrs. Miller, wait. You can't just go in," the receptionist cried, rising from her desk, her voice betraying a genuine, startled alarm. But I had already reached the heavy, imposing oak doors that guarded the inner sanctum of the attorney's suites. "Relax, Lauren," I said, calling her by name, a small courtesy to mask the iron behind my tone. "My husband is expecting me." I pushed the heavy doors open. My heart was pounding, a rhythmic, firm beat of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Not fear, but the cold fire of resolve. The bullpen, a landscape of designer desks and young associates hunched over their screens, suddenly fell into an uncomfortable, suffocating silence. Some recognized me and lowered their eyes, sensing the tremor in the atmosphere. Others, the younger ones who had only heard the rumors, watched me with a mix of curiosity and dread. Daniel's office was at the end of the long hallway, his name engraved on a gleaming brass plaque that caught the overhead light. His secretary, Laura, a woman in her 50s who had always treated me with a gentle, if cautious, kindness, went visibly pale when our gazes locked. "Eleanor, honey, Daniel is in. I know he's alone. I just spoke with him." I interrupted her, offering a smile that was brittle, a thin line of porcelain that didn't reach my eyes. "Laura, this is none of your business. Please don't put yourself in the middle of this." The conflict flickered across her face, a momentary struggle between professional obligation and human empathy, but she ultimately nodded slowly and looked away, ceding the ground. I appreciated the sanctuary of her silence. Without a single knock, I shoved the heavy office door open. Daniel was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to me, his silhouette framed against the chaotic, sprawling city streets far below. Hearing the intrusion, he spun around, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He looked absolutely wrecked. He was wearing the same wrinkled shirt from the hotel parking garage that morning, his tie hanging loose and forgotten, his eyes ringed with dark, exhausted smudges. His face was a grotesque collage of anger, raw panic, and a fleeting, pathetic shadow of what might have been remorse. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice a ragged whisper that failed to conceal the tremor of a man coming apart at the seams. "Are you trying to ruin me?" "You did that all by yourself," I replied, closing the door behind me with a soft, final click that sounded like the locking of a cage. I reached into my leather tote, withdrew a thick manila envelope, and dropped it onto his immaculate oak desk, the papers sliding across the surface with a heavy, ominous thud. The divorce papers, the proposed settlement, the final chapter of a story I had written myself. And now I watched as the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in his own office. The document was clear, the terms were non-negotiable, and the weight of it hung in the air between us as I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through his frantic excuses. "You wanted a life without boundaries, Daniel? You have it. But every freedom comes with a price, and today you are going to pay the first installment of yours. Now sign. Or look at the contents of that folder, and tell me if you are prepared to burn with me." I didn't let him speak. I merely crossed my arms, waiting for the gravity of his situation to shatter his composure entirely. He looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb, his hands trembling as he reached out, and as he touched the edge of the paper, his gaze met mine, begging for a mercy I had already discarded in the silence of our bedroom. "Sign," I repeated, and as he hesitantly lifted the cover, the flicker of realization in his eyes told me he knew exactly what was inside. He knew that the evidence of his betrayal was no longer a shadow, but a concrete wall he had nowhere to run from. Agreement. Everything is in there, meticulously detailed and signed by me. Your turn. I leaned back slightly, my composure a fragile diamond-hard shield against the suffocating tension in the room. He stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled, venomous snake ready to strike the moment he touched it. His knuckles turned white, the skin stretched thin over his desperation. Then he glanced frantically toward the mahogany door, his eyes wide and unfocused, blindly imagining the vultures of this law firm pressing their ears against the wood, hungry for a scandal to feast upon. "Eleanor, for the love of God, keep your voice down. We can talk about this at home. This isn't the place." His whisper was a jagged plea, stripped of all authority. "This is the only place that matters," I countered, my gaze sweeping over the imposing shelves heavy with law books that seemed to mock the lawless state of his morality, the gold-framed diplomas that now looked like cheap stage props, and finally, that barren square of dust on the desk where our wedding photo used to sit. I had noticed its absence the moment I stepped inside. A silent, final eviction. This is the very foundation where you constructed your elaborate lie, where you leveraged your prestige and influence to bankroll a double life that treated our vows like loose change. It seems only poetic justice that your world crumbles exactly where you built it. He stepped closer, planting his trembling hands on the desk, leaning into my space as if sheer physical proximity could intimidate me into silence. He tried to project the formidable aura of a high-powered attorney, but the veneer was cracked, exposing a man drowning in his own cowardice. "Listen to me, Chloe," he choked out, the name rolling off his tongue with a disgusting familiarity. "It isn't what you think. She is unstable, completely obsessed." I tried to sever the ties, but she held a knife to my throat, threatening to go to her father and expose me for harassment. She could dismantle my entire career with a single word. "Eleanor, I was trapped in a cage of her making." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my lips, a sound so cold it seemed to freeze the stagnant air between us. "Seriously? That is the narrative today? Because 2 days ago, standing in that dim parking garage, you insisted it was merely work-related professional courtesy. Last night, she was a confused, wayward child you were mentoring. Now suddenly, she is a calculated psychopath blackmailing you? How remarkably convenient, Daniel. You are always the martyr, aren't you? Never the bastard who is actively sleeping with his own boss's daughter." "I will not allow you to speak over me," I snapped, my voice ringing out, sharp and brittle as shards of shattered glass. He recoiled as if I had physically struck him. "You do not allow me anything, Daniel. Not since the second I watched you slink into that hotel like a thief in the night. I am the one speaking now, and you will listen. You have 2 options. You sign these papers and you accept the division of assets exactly as stipulated. A settlement that is, frankly, outrageously generous given that I possess enough evidence to see you dragged through criminal court for the embezzlement I have unearthed. This ends here in a civilized, quiet retreat into obscurity. Or you force my hand, and I drag every sordid detail into the light. And I do not mean just to a divorce judge. I mean to every single one of your partners, your high-profile clients, and the financial press. A prominent family lawyer caught in an embezzlement scandal with his partner's daughter. It has a haunting, permanent ring to it, doesn't it?" The air in the room was electric, heavy with the stench of his impending ruin. Suddenly, the heavy oak door swung open with such violence that it rattled the frame. Harrison Miller, the senior partner and the formidable architect of this firm, filled the threshold. At 60, he still possessed the rigid posture of a veteran boxer, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory, all-seeing gaze of a hawk. Beside him, pale as a wax figurine but with eyes bloodshot from a cocktail of rage and humiliation, stood Chloe. She must have come sprinting from her own office, desperate to witness the carnage. "What the hell is going on here?" Miller's voice was a deep, resonant thunder that shook the floorboards. His eyes darted from Daniel, who was sweating profusely, his composure dissolving into a puddle of panic, to me standing tall and crystalline in my resolve, and finally to the manila envelope lying on the desk like a declaration of absolute war. "Harrison, this isn't what you think," Daniel started, his voice a pathetic, trembling squeak, but Miller silenced him with a dismissive wave of his hand. I heard shouting echoing all the way from my office, "And my daughter has informed me of some deeply concerning allegations," Miller growled, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that had crushed many a witness in his long career. "Eleanor, I am profoundly sorry it has come to this," he stated, his voice tight. "Daniel, if you have done anything to compromise the integrity of this firm—" "I haven't done anything," Daniel shrieked, his composure completely shattered. "He's a liar." Chloe's voice, shrill and jagged with furious, hot tears, sliced through the tension. She pointed a shaking finger at Daniel, her face contorted in betrayal. "You used me, you coward. You told me your marriage was a hollow shell, a sham you were just waiting to escape. You swore to me that I was the love of your life. It was all a curated performance. The spectacle was wretched, a grotesque scene worthy of a bottom-tier soap opera. But I remained unmoved. I had no interest in their histrionics. I was here for a surgical extraction." "Mr. Miller," I said, addressing the senior partner with a composure that contrasted sharply against the hysterical weeping of the woman and the stuttering terror of the man. I sincerely apologize that you have been forced to witness this deplorable scene, but as the evidence before you illustrates, your partner's personal conduct has utterly compromised his professional ethics, and I am concerned that his reckless disregard for our assets may ultimately undermine the very foundation of this prestigious institution. My fingers tightened around the heavy, cream-colored envelope, its weight feeling like an anchor tethering the truth to reality. I extended my hand, presenting the dossier to Mr. Miller. His gaze drifted from my face to the paper, a silent invitation to witness the undoing of a man he had once mentored. "This is my divorce petition," I continued, my voice steady, stripped of the jagged edges of betrayal. "Inside, you will find meticulous documentation of the irregular wire transfers that have siphoned life from our joint accounts. My investigator has traced the digital breadcrumbs directly to your daughter's lifestyle. Lavish downtown apartments, custom-cut diamonds, and spontaneous sun-drenched vacations, all paid for by the capital of a marriage that was supposed to be a partnership, but had become a hollow shell." Mr. Miller's complexion drained until his skin resembled the stark, unyielding paper of the files. He reached for the envelope, his hands trembling slightly, clutching the documents as if they were searing hot coals capable of burning the prestige he had spent a lifetime building. "Is this true, Daniel?" His voice was no longer the measured tone of a senior partner. It was a dangerous, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate through the mahogany-paneled walls. "Harrison, she is exaggerating, I swear," Daniel stammered, his eyes darting frantically. "It was simply to help her. Chloe had debts. You wouldn't understand the pressure. Don't you dare use me as a convenient excuse, you son of a bitch," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with a volatility that filled the cramped room. The tears of frantic performative fury had finally dried, leaving behind a hard crystalline sheen of spurned hatred. "I spent my own money," she spat, her gaze turning venomous. "Your money was nothing more than a bribe, a pathetic currency used to keep me quiet, to keep me compliant. You are utterly, unforgivably pathetic." Daniel looked like a cornered animal, his shoulders hunched, glancing from the towering figure of his boss to the seething woman he had toyed with, desperately searching for an exit that had long since been barred by the weight of evidence. The facade, that carefully curated mask of the successful silver-tongued lawyer, had shattered, leaving behind a petty, terrified shell of a man whose world was dissolving into ash. "Enough," Mr. Miller commanded, his authority cutting through the air like a guillotine. He looked at his daughter, his expression a volatile cocktail of paternal disappointment and professional fury. "Chloe, go to my office. Immediately." Then he pivoted toward me, his posture softening just a fraction. "Eleanor, I am truly sorry for the wreckage you have been forced to navigate. You have my word that this internal matter will be handled with the gravity it demands. We do not tolerate conduct that compromises the integrity of this firm." I inclined my head, a slow, deliberate movement. "I expect nothing less," I replied, my eyes locked onto his. "Because if appropriate measures are not taken, I am prepared to bring this information into the harsh light of the public eye. Not merely for the sake of a clean break in my divorce, but as a warning to any other woman who might find herself in his orbit." I turned my attention to my lawyer, Miss Vance, signaling the end of the engagement. I grasped my purse with both hands, the leather firm beneath my touch. The circle was now complete. I had planted the seeds of skepticism, of deep-seated distrust, in the only soil that mattered to Daniel, his professional prestige. Harrison Miller would never look at him with the same blind trust again, and Chloe, the woman scorned, would undoubtedly become his most formidable enemy within these very walls. As I walked out, the silence in the bullpen was suffocating, thick with the weight of unsaid things. Every eye was locked onto my path. Some radiated a quiet, painful pity, others burned with a sharp, involuntary admiration, but most were hungry for the morbid thrill of seeing a titan fall. I strode with my head held high, the air humming with the story spreading like wildfire in my wake. Just as my hand brushed the cool surface of the glass doors, I heard the frantic, rhythmic slap of footsteps hitting the carpet behind me. Wait! Eleanor, wait! It was Daniel. He had bolted from his office, his face flushed a mottled, unhealthy red, his eyes wide and pleading. Eleanor, please. I am sorry. I am truly deeply sorry. Tell me what I must do. Anything at all, just don't destroy my life. I stopped. I turned around slowly, the motion deliberate, giving him the full weight of my indifference. Every lawyer, every paralegal, and every secretary in the vicinity held their breath, waiting for the climax. This was the final scene, and I was the one who had scripted every line. Your life, Daniel, I said, my voice cutting through the tension with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. You destroyed that yourself. The first time you chose to lie to your wife. The second time you stole from our home to purchase necklaces for another woman. And what of that entire night, the one you claimed was spent working while I sat alone in a parking garage waiting for a ghost? I did nothing to you, Daniel. I simply grew tired of waiting for a man who wasn't there, so I finally walked away. The heavy glass door slid shut behind me, effectively sealing in the scandal, the lingering scent of shame, and the utter disaster I had left in my wake. Out on the sidewalk, the midday sun was blinding, a sharp contrast to the stale, artificial lighting of the office. I took a long deep breath. The air tasted of exhaust fumes, burnt coffee, and the raw, unadulterated energy of the city. It didn't smell like deception. It didn't smell like his cheap, cloying cologne or the suffocating stench of guilt. My phone buzzed against my palm. A text from Sarah. All good. Do you need me to come over? I allowed myself the first real smile I had felt in years. A tired, frayed, yet entirely clean expression. I tapped out my response. It's done. Let the show begin. See you at home. Bring wine, the expensive one. I looked up at the towering windows of the firm, watching the sunlight glint off the glass. Up there, the life I once knew was crumbling into fine, unrecognizable dust. And down here on the bustling street I was finally intact, breathing. The air in the penthouse felt lighter, purged of the stifling, ozone-heavy pressure that had haunted us for months. I raised the crystal glass to my lips. The chilled white wine was crisp, cutting through the lingering taste of ash in my mouth. It tasted like victory, a jagged, sour, and utterly exhausting victory, but a victory nonetheless. Sarah and I were sprawled in the living room, the city's skyline glowing like a scattered handful of diamonds beyond the glass. Our shoes lay abandoned on the hardwood, and our feet were propped up on the mahogany coffee table with an uncharacteristic disregard for the furniture's pristine surface. The late afternoon sun bled across the floorboards, casting long melancholic shadows that seemed to highlight the artifacts of a life that no longer belonged to me. Everything here felt alien, like a set piece from a play I had finished performing. The plush throw pillows we had once debated over, the silver-framed photograph from our honeymoon in Hawaii, and that wretched, overpriced designer vase Daniel had insisted was a statement piece. They were nothing more than debris from a shipwreck. Sarah swirled the remainder of her drink, her gaze fixed on the sunset. I can't believe you actually dropped the papers right in the middle of the firm, she murmured, shaking her head with a grin that was equal parts shock and fierce admiration. You have balls of steel, Eleanor. I didn't have a choice, I whispered, staring into the depths of my glass. I had to ensure the impact was total. If I had dropped those papers in the privacy of this penthouse, he would have twisted the narrative, spun it into a mere domestic spat or a misunderstanding to be swept under the rug. But there in the lion's den, under the cold, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the firm, there was no escape from the truth. Well, Harrison Miller is never going to forget that scene, and neither is Chloe, Sarah said, her voice dripping with a satisfaction that echoed my own. The idiot really built his own nightmare. and today he finally stepped into it. So what now? The boring legal grind? I hope so, I said, a wave of exhaustion finally pulling at my shoulders. I hope it's mind-numbingly boring and that it concludes with me securing half of everything that is rightfully mine, which, given his portfolio, is a staggering amount. I sighed, the sound echoing in the quiet room, and set my glass down. The worst is over. The charade has ended. There are no more secrets to hide. No more apologies to manufacture. Just then the doorbell rang. A shrill, insistent, and jarring sound that sliced through our sanctuary. Sarah and I froze, exchanging a look of sudden apprehension. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked, her voice dropping. "Tell me it's not the press." She rose, moving with a practiced caution to check the peephole. The curiosity on her face vanished, replaced by a shadow of dread. "Mom." A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I was far from ready for another confrontation, especially with her, but I knew with a sinking certainty that it was inevitable. I opened the door. My mother, Martha, stood on the landing, looking like a ghost in the dim hallway light. She wore a light coat that seemed inadequate for the chill radiating from her. Her purse clutched against her chest like a shield. Her face, usually a mask of composed serenity, was drained of color. Her eyes were puffy, though she held back tears with a rigid, practiced discipline. She wore that familiar, terrifying expression of martyrdom she donned when taking me for childhood vaccinations. A look that said, "This will hurt, but it is necessary." "Mom, let me in," I said, stepping aside as her tone left no room for debate. She swept past me, her eyes sweeping over the apartment, landing on Sarah and the wine glasses, the scene of both mourning and celebration. Her mouth tightened into a thin, bloodless line. "Sarah, I would like to speak to your sister alone," she demanded. "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say it in front of her," I interjected before Sarah could retreat. "There are no secrets here anymore, Mother. None." She nodded bitterly, a jagged movement of her chin, and perched on the very edge of the sofa, refusing to remove her coat as if she were merely a passing storm in this house. "I spoke with Daniel's mother," she began, the words hanging heavy and suffocating in the air. A profound silence descended, broken only by the hum of the city outside. "I imagine you did," I said, crossing my arms over my chest to keep from trembling. "She is devastated, Eleanor. She says you have destroyed her son, humiliated him before his peers, and ruined a brilliant career. Says you—" I interrupted her, the rage I thought I had drained now surging back, hotter than before. "And what did you tell her, Mom? Did you tell her that her precious boy is a saint? Did you tell her that I'm just hysterical, a woman prone to fits?" "I told her that I am so sorry," she replied, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't just disapproval. It was fear, a primal, deep-seated terror of the world shifting beneath her feet. "But I came here to talk about us, about this family. What you did today dragged our name through the mud. All of Chicago will be talking." Sarah let out a dry, incredulous laugh that sounded like cracking glass. "For God's sake, Mom, you're worried about the neighbors? Her husband has been sleeping with his boss's daughter for nearly a year. That doesn't drag our name through the mud? That doesn't give people something to talk about? You fix those things at home," my mother exploded, her knuckles white as she slammed her fist against the velvet arm of the sofa. "You do not air your dirty laundry in public, Eleanor. Never. Eleanor, you broke the most fundamental, the most sacred rule of this house. You took the jagged, bloodied edges of your private heartbreak and thrust them into the blinding, indifferent light of the public square. You brought this scandal right to our front door, staining the threshold with the mess of your own undoing." I stepped forward, my boots feeling heavy against the polished hardwood, until there was no more distance, no more pretense of decorum, no more patience left in the air between us. Just two women, bound by the same DNA, standing on opposite sides of an abyss carved out by years of silence and fundamental misunderstanding. Daniel brought the shame when he decided that a fleeting thrill was worth more than the vows he swore. When he chose to treat our marriage like a discarded wrapper. But you, Mother, you brought the poison when you commanded me to endure it, to look away, to shutter my eyes against the rot just as you had done for decades. All I have done is rip the bandages off and look, Mom, look around at the wreckage. Do you see anything here, in this pristine condo, on this velvet sofa, in this curated life of perfectly packaged lies, that is actually worth salvaging? Family is worth saving, she screamed, her voice cracking the stillness of the room like a gunshot. And suddenly, the composure she had guarded so fiercely shattered. Tears spilled out, frantic, furious, uncontrolled, carving glistening tracks through the expensive powder on her cheeks. Not being alone is worth the cost, she choked out. Not having to stand at the edge of the world and start completely over at 40 is worth every indignity. You don't know what is waiting for you in the wilderness, Eleanor. Loneliness is a cold, dark well, and once you tumble into its depths, the light never reaches you again. You are trapped in the echo of your own silence forever. Her scream, thick with an anguish so ancient and profound it felt like it had been rotting in her soul since before I was born, froze Sarah and me in our tracks. We weren't just arguing about my crumbling marriage anymore. We were excavating her past, the entirety of her womanhood, the hollow space where her true self used to reside. Why, Mom? I asked, my voice barely a tremor, catching on the jagged edges of my own resentment. Why did you allow it to swallow you whole? Was it for us? Was it for the hollow praise of a society that doesn't care if you're dying inside as long as your tea parties are punctual? Or was it simply because you were too terrified to be anything but a shadow? She lowered her head, the weight of the question bowing her neck. Her shoulders began to shake, a rhythmic, shuddering movement that spoke of a surrender long overdue. When she finally spoke, her voice was a raw, torn whisper, stripped of all artifice. It was for all of it, she admitted, her breath hitching. For you kids, for the reputation of this house, to ensure I didn't disappoint my parents who had raised me to be a vessel for other people's expectations. Because that is what women of my generation were crafted to be. We endured your father. It was once, it was always just once, according to him, with his secretary, a foolish, wide-eyed 20-something who truly believed he was going to toss his life away for a girl who didn't know the first thing about his demons. She looked up at me, and her eyes were two bottomless, desolate wells of sorrow. When the truth finally pierced my heart, I wanted to kill him for the arrogance of it, and then I wanted to kill myself for being tethered to such cruelty. But you were 10, Eleanor. Sarah was 12 and Paul was only 8. What was I to do? Shatter the family architecture? Condemn you to be the pathetic children of a broken home? The ones the neighborhood whispered about at Sunday brunch? No, I couldn't bear that weight. So I swallowed my pride until it became a stone in my throat. I swallowed my rage until it turned into this permanent, dull ache. And I forgave him because that was the only currency I had to pay for your security. She wiped her face with a hand that trembled, a futile, aggressive gesture against the tide. But forgiveness, honey, let me tell you, it isn't forgetting. It isn't a clean slate. Forgiveness is a prison sentence. It is having to look the man who systematically dismantled your trust in the eye every single morning while you serve him his coffee and ask how he slept. It is swallowing your pride day after day, year after year, just so the world can continue to believe in the illusion of a normal life. And now, at the end of it all, your father looks at me and I still see that same man, the one who broke me. And when he looks at me, he doesn't see a partner. He sees the woman who forgave him but never once granted him true absolution. That is our life, Eleanor. A stalemate of ghosts. Is that what you want? To paint a brave face on your suffering until you completely forget who you were before the mask became your skin? The weight of her confession landed on me like a physical blow, heavy and suffocating. Sarah had pressed her palm to her mouth, her eyes brimming with a grief that had been waiting for a reason to break through the surface. I felt the very floorboards drop out from under me, leaving me suspended in the dark. My entire childhood. All those long suffocating silences at the dinner table. The way my father's presence felt like a storm cloud. The way my mother walked through our house like a ghost haunting her own life. It all suddenly clicked into a terrible, heartbreaking mosaic. "No, Mom," I said, my voice softening. No longer an accusation but a prayer of shared pain. "That isn't what I want. That is the very reason I cannot do what you did. Because I admire the colossal, crushing strength it took for you to sacrifice your soul for us. But I do not want your life. I refuse your silence. I refuse to die a little bit more with every sunrise. I would rather endure the cold, terrifying solitude you're talking about than rot away in the luxury of a warm, comfortable lie." She stared at me for a long, aching moment, the tears leaving salty paths through the lines of her face. Then, with a suddenness that caught me off guard, her lips curved into a tiny, fragile, sad smile. "You are so much stronger than I ever was, Eleanor," she murmured, her voice laced with a weary pride. "You always were. And you are so much braver." She sighed, a sound that seemed to pull from the deepest, most exhausted marrow of her bones. "I told you to endure it because it was the only map I had ever been given, because I convinced myself I was shielding you from the jagged edges of pain. But I realize now that I was just passing down a lifetime installment plan for my own misery, and I don't want that for you. I don't want that for any of you." She stood up with a visible, grinding effort, as if shedding the weight of decades, and slowly took off her coat, the heavy fabric sighing as she draped it over the back of the sofa, a gesture of finality that signaled she was finally ready to let the world see her, unvarnished and unmasked. The heavy wool of her coat hitting the sofa cushion sounded like a final, definitive period at the end of a long, agonizing chapter. It was an intimate, domestic gesture stripped of pretense, a silent declaration that she was no longer here to wage war or guard secrets, but simply to exist as a mother. She was laying down the armor she had worn for years, finally standing bare before the wreckage we had both contributed to. "You are right," I whispered, the shame of our shared history pressing down on my chest like lead. "You brought the truth to the surface, Mom. It is a jagged, ugly thing, and God, it hurts to look at it." But as I felt the sharpness of it, I realized that truth does not rot from the inside out. It does not poison the blood like the silence we kept for so long. She stepped toward me, her gait slightly unsteady, and placed her calloused, warm palms upon my shoulders. That touch, grounding and tactile, felt like an infusion of ancient, quiet strength, the kind that survives seasons of frost. "Do what you have to do, honey," she murmured, her voice steadying as she looked into my eyes. "Count on me. Not because I wish to dictate your path or steer your hands, but because I am here to witness whatever you decide." She gestured toward the high-vaulted ceiling of the penthouse, her hand waving dismissively at the gilded cage that had held my misery for years. "These marble floors, this empty space, the view of a city that feels like a stranger. These are not your life. You are your life, Eleanor. Your existence is far too luminous to be dimmed for the sake of a man who possesses eyes but cannot see what he holds." It was the most profound act of love I had felt from her in a decade. Before I could process the swell of emotion, Sarah was there, her arms wrapping around both of us, anchoring us against the gravity of the room. We stood there, a trio of broken things crying in the heart of my failed marriage. We wept for the wasted years, for the silent battles we never dared to wage, and for the grueling solitary war I was finally ready to win. Yet, peace is a fragile visitor. By the next day, the facade was already under siege. Teresa, Daniel's mother, stood at my door with the wounded dignity of a lioness protecting her cub. Yet her eyes possessed the cold, calculating intelligence of a woman who measured the world in social capital. "Eleanor, can we navigate this with a shred of grace?" she began, bypassing pleasantries, refusing to even cross the threshold. "Let us treat this as a temporary separation therapy. Daniel is in pieces. He realizes he committed a colossal error." "It was no error, Teresa," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor she expected. "It was a choice. a deliberate, recurring sequence of choices sustained over months. Therapy cannot mend a spirit shattered by disrespect and disloyalty. She tightened her jaw, her expression curdling into bitterness. He will grant you whatever you demand, the condo, a generous settlement, but do not dismantle his career. If you march into court with that evidence, he will lose more than just your hand in marriage. He will lose his standing, his future, everything. And you would not want that on your conscience. He is the father of the children you could have had. I looked at her, my resolve unshakable. We have no children, and I thank the universe for that mercy every waking hour. I do not crave the destruction of his career, Teresa. I only desire what is mine and the absolute, permanent distance from him. Tell your son that if he signs the uncontested settlement, he may retain his professional skin, even if he must retreat to a different firm. That is my final offer. Teresa held my gaze, and for a fleeting moment the mask slipped. She saw the iron behind my eyes and understood that the game was over. Her son had no remaining maneuvers. She offered a single, curt nod and vanished. Then, as if the universe were mocking me with its predictability, the night brought the final, desperate echo. At 1 a.m., a soft, rhythmic rapping at the door disturbed the silence. Through the peephole, I saw a specter of the man I once knew. Daniel, unhinged, his face masked by 3 days of stubble, radiating the scent of cheap whiskey and the stench of his own undoing. I unlatched the deadbolt but held the security chain taut, keeping the gap narrow. Eleanor, please just let me in. Let me explain. I have heard enough, Daniel, I said, my voice cold as the night air. There is nothing left for you to say. I love you, he sobbed, his voice fracturing into a jagged, pathetic sound. I realize it now. It was all a mistake, a way to escape. I don't even know, but you are my life. We cannot throw what we have into the trash. I observed him through that sliver of space. A man who once made me laugh, a man whose future I had once braided with my own. I searched my heart for a spark of anger or a remnant of affection, but I found only a vast, serene emptiness. No, Daniel, I said with a terrifying, absolute calm. You do not love me. You love the life I facilitated for you. The comfortable, respectable veneer with a wife who ironed your shirts and masked your flaws. You want me to bury your shame under the rug, so you can keep living your lie. But I am not that woman anymore, and that life is a ghost. You killed it yourself. We can salvage this, he begged, his forehead pressing against the wood as if seeking a doorway that was already bolted shut. We cannot, I said, because the foundation is gone and you cannot build anything on top of a hole. Go away, Daniel. Talk to your lawyer, sign the papers, and leave me alone. It is the only decent thing you can do for me in the end. I shut the door, the heavy oak thudding shut with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb. On the other side, I heard the heartbreaking, pathetic sound of him sliding down the wood until his weight rested against the landing. A sob escaped him, an ugly, ragged sound that tore through the silence of the hallway, but I didn't reach out. After a while, the sobbing ceased, replaced by the slow, dragging rhythm of his footsteps. They grew fainter, retreating into the distance until the house was swallowed by a deafening, absolute quiet. I leaned my forehead against the door on my side, the side of my new life. It was empty, certainly, and draped in the terrifying fog of uncertainty, but it was clean. For the first time in a decade, the air in my lungs didn't taste of compromise. The final phantom shackle, the ghost of a love long dead, had been severed. All that remained was the machinery of termination. Paper, ink, and the cold, unyielding law. I was ready. The courthouse was a cavern of stale air, smelling of lemon-scented wax, ancient fear, and the grinding gears of bureaucracy. It was a stagnant odor, a scent that hadn't evolved in decades, clinging to the mahogany walls like dust. I, Eleanor, sat stiffly on a hard bench in the hearing room. Beside me, Olivia Vance was a bastion of calm, her presence as solid and reassuring as a battleship in a storm. Across the aisle at the opposing table, Daniel sat with his attorney, a man whose face was a map of exhaustion, his brow constantly furrowed as he whispered to his client with an agitation that verged on desperation. Daniel barely dared to look at me. He looked thinner, as if his guilt had gnawed away at his frame. His expensive suit, tailored once for a man of status, hung loosely on his shoulders now. His natural elegance had curdled into a cheap, grotesque imitation of itself. I, conversely, felt anchored in my simple navy blue dress. It was not the costume of a vengeful woman, nor the tattered rags of a victim. It was the sharp, efficient uniform of someone conducting a final business transaction. Your Honor, Daniel's lawyer began, his voice rasping as the judge, a middle-aged woman with thin, clinical wire-rimmed glasses, called for opening statements. My client wishes to express his profound remorse for the mistakes made, which in no way were meant to diminish the deep, unwavering respect he holds for Mrs. Miller. However, we consider the proposed division of assets presented by the petitioner to be excessive. It does not reflect the spirit of cooperation my client has sought to demonstrate, nor does it account for his current professional standing, which has been catastrophically damaged by these unfortunate circumstances. Olivia didn't hesitate. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice slicing through the stuffy room, clear and serene. Your Honor, my client is not present to arbitrate the validity of remorse, but to enforce her rights. The respondent's spirit of cooperation was conspicuously absent until he was caught red-handed after months of meticulous deception and the systematic diversion of our joint marital funds. This proposal is equitable, and as for his professional deterioration, it stems entirely from his own moral failings, not my client's actions, a fact we have documented with exhaustive precision. The judge's gaze flickered across the thick case file, her spectacles sliding slightly down her nose. I see the petitioner has submitted a comprehensive evidentiary dossier. Any objections to its validity, Counselor? Daniel's lawyer swallowed, his throat working visibly. Your Honor, some of that evidence may have been obtained in a manner that, all obtained legally and in full compliance with the privacy statutes, Olivia interjected, her movements graceful as she slid a copy of the investigator's reports and certified bank statements across the table to the clerk. Photographs, professional surveillance logs, statements from joint accounts showing the recurring systematic wire transfers to third-party accounts, and for the record an audio recording of a conversation in which the third party, Chloe Miller, explicitly admits to the illicit relationship. No illegal wiretaps, Your Honor. Just the cold, unvarnished facts. Daniel grew ashen, his skin turning the color of wet parchment at the mere mention of Chloe's name. His lawyer muttered a rebuke but eventually slumped into his chair in a gesture of profound resignation. The judge began to leaf through the photographs. One image in particular was agonizingly sharp. Daniel and Chloe, walking into the hotel with the casual air of a couple who believed they were invisible. She moved then to the bank statements, where the illicit transfers to an account under Chloe Miller's name stood out with a frequency that was nothing short of shameful. Mr. Miller, the judge said, peering over the edge of her glasses. Her tone was devoid of judgment, yet it felt like a hammer blow. Do you acknowledge these transfers? Daniel opened his mouth, his throat working, but for a moment only a dry, rattling croak emerged. He looked small, trapped in the harsh lighting of the room. Finally, he gave a minuscule, trembling nod. Yes, Your Honor, but they were loans to help her. Loans without a contract, without interest, and with no intention of repayment as evidenced by the text messages also included in the file, Olivia noted, her voice slicing through the thick, stagnant air of the courtroom with a surgical precision that left no room for rebuttal. She didn't merely present evidence. She laid bare the anatomy of a betrayal. Each document she slid across the mahogany surface was a silent scream of wasted devotion. The funds had not been spirited away for some noble investment or a shared future. They were drawn from an account fed by our life savings, the very bedrock of our existence, siphoned off to sustain a shadow life I had known nothing about until the walls came crashing down. The legal battle that followed was brief, sharp, and brutal, like a skirmish in a war where the stakes were not land, but the debris of a shattered soul. In a final flailing burst of desperation, Daniel tried to argue that the Chicago penthouse, the place where I had painstakingly curated every texture and color to create a sanctuary, was largely the fruit of his labor. He attempted to cast me as a mere passenger in his success, suggesting I should settle for less, a pittance to buy my silence. That was the moment Olivia chose to strike. She laid out the final irrefutable documents, the contracts from my interior design business, the meticulously kept pay stubs, and the bank records demonstrating that I had contributed as much, if not more, to the mortgage and living expenses for years. She highlighted the lean, hungry years at the beginning, when he was nothing more than a junior associate drowning in the crushing weight of law school debt, and I had sacrificed my own professional milestones to keep our heads above water. "Your Honor," Olivia said, and for the first time, her voice dipped into a register of restrained, human emotion that felt more powerful than any legal precedent. She did not just work. She built a home. And that home was betrayed. All she is asking for now is the restoration of what was rightfully hers. Not a penny more, not a penny less. The judge deliberated, her quill scratching against the paper like the ticking of a clock counting down to my liberation. The courtroom was oppressively silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the rapid, shallow rhythm of my own breathing. I looked down at my hands, clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned a ghostly white. I didn't feel the sharp electric surge of triumph. I felt only an immense, bone-deep exhaustion, a heavy cloak that I had been wearing for months, and a desperate, aching yearning for the silence that follows a storm. Reviewing the history and the evidence provided, the judge finally declared, her gaze firm as she looked over the rim of her spectacles, and finding no cause to justify a disproportionate split, I find the settlement agreement proposed by Eleanor Miller to be fair and according to law. Approved under the requested terms. 50% division of assets. Spousal maintenance granted. Given the current disparity in income as requested. She cleared her throat, a small clinical sound in the vast room. Custody of the shared pet. A cat named Wright goes to Eleanor. She closed the folder with a sharp final thack that echoed against the wood-paneled walls. I wish both parties peace as they move forward. Case closed. The sharp metallic bang of the gavel resonated through my skull, signaling the end. 7 years of my life. 7 years of laughter, secrets, shared dreams, and quiet dinners, reduced to a few minutes of cold legal jargon and the clinical distribution of property. Olivia squeezed my arm, her smile bright with professional satisfaction, a stark contrast to the hollow space expanding inside my chest. Across the aisle, Daniel's lawyer was whispering urgently, packing up his briefcase with hurried motions, but Daniel remained statuesque. He wasn't moving. He was staring at me with bloodshot eyes, a harrowing mixture of disbelief and a simmering toxic hatred that seemed to scorch the air between us. I stood, my legs feeling strangely heavy, and walked out of the courtroom without once looking back. I did not need to see the wreckage. I already knew what it looked like. Out in the hallway, the air was cool, quiet, and blessedly sterile. I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't taste like the past. Olivia handed me a certified copy of the judgment. "It's done, Eleanor. You are free and you are financially secure. You won." I looked at the document, the ink still smelling of fresh bureaucratic finality. "I didn't win anything that wasn't already mine," I said, my voice barely a whisper as I slipped the paper into my tote bag. "But thank you, Olivia, for everything." As I walked down the courthouse steps, the mid-morning sun was blindingly bright, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare. I felt a presence behind me, a familiar, frantic energy. "Eleanor, wait, please." I stopped, my boots scraping against the concrete. I didn't turn. I didn't say anything. So this is how it all ends? With the division of bank accounts and a cat? His voice was raspy, broken, clinging to the remnants of a life he had dismantled himself. It ended months ago, Daniel, in a dark parking garage, I said, my back still to him. Today was just paperwork. He lowered his head, the sound of his ragged breathing trailing off. I don't hate you, even though you hate me. No, I said, and the absolute terrifying truth of my own words surprised me, cooling the embers of my resentment. I don't hate you. Hate requires energy, Daniel. It requires an investment of passion, and I spent every ounce of what I had left on you. What I feel is nothing. You are a stranger now, and I want you to stay that way. For the first time I saw that my indifference, the quiet, immovable wall I had built around my heart, hit him harder than any insult ever could. He swayed slightly as if struck. I loved you, really, maybe. He stammered, but it wasn't enough. And I don't love you anymore. It's that simple and that sad. Goodbye, Daniel. I walked down the rest of the steps without turning my head. I didn't hear his footsteps behind me, and I didn't listen for any lingering plea. I heard only the vast, indifferent noise of the city, keeping its relentless spin, oblivious to the small death I had just witnessed. My old life was left behind in that dark, cold room, and I was walking step by steady step toward whatever unknown future lay ahead. 1 year later, the storefront smelled of fresh paint, white lies, and the crisp, effervescent promise of champagne. Sis. That's what the elegant neon sign on the exposed brick wall read, glowing in a soft, welcoming amber hue that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of our collective heartbeat. Beneath it, Sarah and I stood, draped in our finest dresses, silks and linens that felt like armor polished by the fires of the past year. We were the hostesses of a new reality, greeting friends, family, and a steady stream of clients who navigated the threshold with smiles that felt earned, not performative. This studio, a modest yet undeniably charming sanctuary tucked into the heart of Wicker Park, was built from the wreckage of my former life. A substantial chunk of my divorce settlement, bolstered by a small, nerve-wracking business loan, had poured into every square inch. The brand new computers, the carefully organized racks of tactile fabric swatches that whispered of texture and comfort, and the massive plush sofa. It was designed specifically for intimacy, a place where clients could sit and truly dream up their homes. Real, lived-in homes, not the cold, sterile showrooms that defined the existence I had fled. The place was electric, humming with the low, pleasant roar of a celebration that felt like an exhale after holding my breath for months. My parents were there, woven into the fabric of the room. My mother, Martha, stood with a crystal flute of champagne, her face animated as she engaged in a spirited conversation with an old client of mine. When she caught my eye, she didn't just look at me. She winked, a gesture that bridged the gap between our years of misunderstanding. There was a profound lightness to her, a shedding of the maternal armor she had worn to protect herself, as if by supporting my independence unconditionally, she had finally granted herself the grace to forgive her own past shortcomings. My father, Edward, stood anchored beside her, uncharacteristically quiet, yet his hand rested with deliberate, soft intent on the small of her back. It was a timid, almost tentative gesture, one that suggested the beginnings of something different between them, or perhaps simply the quiet, dignified truce of two war veterans who had finally stopped fighting their own battles. The room was a mosaic of my survival. My work friends, my old college roommates, and even a handful of clients who had braved the uncertainty of my transition because they believed in the vision I held. There was no trace of pity in their gazes, no lingering shadows of the woman who had once stood on that staircase. There was only curiosity, admiration, and the shimmering, genuine joy of witnesses to a resurrection. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, drifting up beside me with a bottle of champagne, the bubbles dancing in the light as she offered to refill my glass. I paused, feeling the weight of the moment sink into my marrow. "A little, but it's a good nervous," I replied, my voice steady, resonate. The nerves of someone finally starting something that belongs to them, completely to them. Hell yeah. She beamed, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and we tapped our glasses together. A clear, sharp sound that sealed the pact. Then Sarah stepped forward and tapped her glass with a silver spoon. The high-pitched chime cutting through the air until the chatter faded into a respectful silence. All right. Thank you all for coming. For those who don't know, this has been a dream my little sister and I have shared for years. And look, sometimes the endings that feel catastrophic are just the beginnings we've needed all along. She turned, her eyes shining with unshed, happy tears. Eleanor isn't just the best designer I know. She's the bravest person I know. And tonight, I toast to her, to us, and to all new beginnings. Cheers. The crowd echoed her. A chorus of voices rising to toast our rebirth. The sound of clinking glass, a symphony of triumph. In that fleeting golden second, my gaze drifted across the room and locked onto Michael Rossi, the private investigator. He stood near the entrance, leaning against the doorframe with a bottle of beer, watching the unfolding scene with an almost imperceptible, satisfied smile. Our eyes met across the distance, and he gave me a slight, respectful nod. A silent communication between a professional and a client who had paid the price of admission to a new life. A nod between two people who recognized the depth of the dark tunnel from which one had emerged. I nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the closure he had facilitated. He turned and slipped out into the night, his job done, his discreet but permanent thumbprint left upon the architecture of my existence. Later, as the party began to wind down and the air grew thick with the scent of perfume and spent ambition, I stepped out the front door into the cool Chicago night. The city was warm, pulsing with a life that no longer felt like it was moving without me. In the pocket of my dress, my phone buzzed with the sharp, insistent vibration of an incoming text from an unknown number. I opened it with a cautious thumb, the screen casting a pale light on my face. It's Chloe. I know you don't have to answer. I just wanted to tell you that I moved to London and that you were right. It wasn't love. It was something else and it cost me dearly. I hope you are doing well, and that you get lots of clients. Goodbye. I read the words once, then twice, the ink digital and fleeting. Then with a thumb that didn't tremble, I deleted the message. It wasn't out of spite or a desire to burn bridges. It was simply that her chapter, like Daniel's, belonged to a book I had already finished reading. I didn't need any more epilogues for characters who were no longer part of my plot. Sarah stepped outside, the warm glow of the studio spilling out behind her, and leaned against the doorframe next to me. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, and as the words left my lips, I realized they were the most honest things I had said in years. Everything was truly okay. I looked up. Above the harsh lines of the brick buildings of Wicker Park, I could see a wide, unencumbered patch of the starry sky. It wasn't the tentative, cold dawn like that one in the hotel parking garage when everything felt lost. It was a full, serene, conquered night. I had lost a marriage, yes, but in the wreckage I had gained a deeper, stronger sisterhood, a craft I lived and breathed, a profound piece of peace, and the hard, wonderful, non-negotiable right to write my own story without lies, without compromises, without anyone by my side who didn't want to be there for me and only for me. Sarah's touch was light, a mere whisper of pressure against my sleeve, yet it anchored me to the earth with a certainty I had not known in years. She offered a soft, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, a look that spoke of shared scars and the quiet triumph of surviving the wreckage of the past. Come on, Sarah said, her voice a melodic tether pulling me back from the vast, indifferent beauty of the cosmos toward the vibrant reality of our new beginning. There is still champagne left, she continued, the clinking of crystal glasses drifting faintly from within like a promise of celebration, and our first client comes in tomorrow at 9 a.m. She tilted her head, her expression softening into an encouragement that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Life goes on, sis. She didn't say it as a platitude. She said it as a mantra, a defiance against the heavy, suffocating silence that had once defined my existence. I looked back at the sky one last time, letting the cool night air wash over my face, stripping away the remnants of a woman who had once been defined by her absences. Then I turned and followed her inside, crossing the threshold back into the warmth of the people who truly loved me, into the humming golden glow of the neon lights that illuminated our very own business, a space we had carved out of our own sweat and resilience. The room felt alive, buzzing with the electric potential of a future that finally belonged solely to us. Life indeed went on, no longer a burden to be carried but a river to be navigated, and for the first time in a very, very long time I actually wanted to.